Chapter 449. The Tang old master left out one of the 4.5 words he feared. Also, Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong plundered so much wealth from the garden of Zhou. Where did it all go? I really did forget. I really am not sensitive enough to these things. I admit my mistake. In the future, I will be even more serious. In a few days, when Su Yurong returns to the capital, I will go back and forth to look for it. I believe that I will find it very beautifully. As I said the day before yesterday, the updates will slow down in the next few days. It will continue until I confirm that I have enough, or until I return to the Qin kingdom. The office of the Department for Purging Officials was in the main alley of the Northern Military Department. Although it was called an alley, it was actually a very wide straight street, able to accommodate 2 carriages side by side. At this time, there were also 2 carriages in the alley, one in front and one behind. There was no one in the carriages, but there were quite a few people outside the alley. Moreover, as the news spread, more people would probably appear. The people outside the alley were the spies of the various powers of the capital. They only dared to look at the estate from the entrance of the alley, not daring to approach. The estate seemed very ordinary and did not give off any sinister feeling, but there was not a single person in the alley below the stone steps. Chen Chongqing stood in front of the gate of the estate, taking out his name card and handing it over to an official. His expression and movements were rather stiff. This was the first time he had handed over his name card to pay a formal visit. He had never done something like this before, so he could not help but be somewhat nervous. Of course, the root cause of his nervousness was still the estate itself. Let alone him, Xian Yuanpo's breathing was also very heavy. Even the normally fearless Tang 36 was very quiet at this moment. In truth, after the carriage passed through the main street of the stone workshop and turned into the main alley of the Northern Military Department, confirming Chen Chongqing's destination, he had not opened his mouth to speak. This estate was the office of the Department for Purging Officials, and also Zhou Tong's residence, the legendary Zhou prison. To many people, especially the subjects of the great Zhou dynasty, this estate was the most sinister and frightening place on the continent, even more frightening than Xuelao City in the land of demons. Because Xuelao City was too far away, but Zhou prison was right next to it. The reason why this estate was sinister and frightening was naturally because of the powerful figure that lived within. The name of Zhou Tong could stop children from crying at night. This was not some literary description, but something that had truly happened. Other than that, there were many similar stories. It was said that several decades ago, the son of the current Minister of Rites had drunk too much wine in a certain brothel, and wanted to force himself on a famous courtesan to spend the night. Just as he was about to succeed, he suddenly heard someone shouting outside the door that Zhou Tong had arrived. The son of the minister was so frightened that he lost control of his bowels, and from then on, he was unable to do anything else. Of course, this did not mean that Zhou Tong was a good person willing to help the people of Jingdou educate their children or be willing to save women in distress. This only showed how terrifying his name was in people's hearts. The entire world knew that Zhou Tong was a cruel and ruthless official, a sinister and evil villain who had harmed countless innocent commoners and unyielding officials. It could be said that Su Li had killed far too many people with his sword, making him a target that many people wanted to kill. Then, everyone in the world wanted to kill Zhou Tong. Even the officials in the same camp as him sometimes wished for him to quickly die. There were even times when some people felt that the heavens had allowed a person like Zhou Tong to appear as a punishment for the human world. According to the normal development of a story, a person like Zhou Tong would at most have a momentary momentum. He should have long since been executed by a heroic emperor, or perhaps transformed into a wisp of smoke by an otherworldly expert. But he did not. This was because he was an extremely high-ranking minister of the great Zhou dynasty, protected by countless soldiers and experts. Moreover, he himself was a star condensation expert. Crucially, he was the Divine Empress's most trusted dog. There were countless people in the world who opposed the Tianhai Divine Empress's rule. About 70% of them did so because she was a woman, and the remaining 30% basically did so because of the evil deeds Zhou Tong had done. This was because no one was a fool. Even the most foolish common people, after so many years, should be able to see that Zhou Tong's tyrannical and evil was actually a manifestation of the Divine Empress's will. The Divine Empress had already ruled the continent for more than 200 years. Her methods of ruling could be considered perfect, but there were still countless people who opposed her. She was keenly aware that as sovereign, she could not blindly conciliate. Thus, she needed a vicious dog, a swift blade, to tear and chop at those people who secretly opposed her. On a deeper level, she needed a person to carry out her evil will. This person was Zhou Tong. He perfectly fulfilled the Divine Empress's requirements. He had no childhood shadow, no entanglement of profit, no necessity. He simply enjoyed imprisoning people under the name of the Great Zhou's laws, torturing and abusing them. From this perspective, Zhou Tong was actually a very pure person. He was a pure evil person. Chen Chongqing had come to the department for purging officials today precisely to see Zhou Tong. From Xining village to the capital, he had heard far too many things concerning Zhou Tong, so he couldn't help but feel somewhat nervous. Only when he pinched that object in his sleeve did he feel slightly better. Brought into the estate by an official of the department for purging officials, he had not expected that this rumored to be incomparably sinister and frightening estate would actually be so quiet and beautiful. They were brought to a courtyard in the deepest part of the city. The courtyard was not very large, with 2 crabapple trees planted within it. The trees were probably rather old, their branches already reaching over the courtyard walls, and a few pink flowers that had yet to fade could still be seen on them. Xian Yuan turned his head, nervously taking stock of his surroundings. Tang 36 slightly arched his brows, seemingly thinking of something. Chen Chongqing, on the other hand, was recalling the buildings and environment he had seen on the road, attempting to calculate where Zhixiu was imprisoned. He was currently at the peak of ethereal opening. In an ordinary sect, he could already be considered an expert. Although he still could not sense the world, he already had some intuition in this aspect, especially after learning the intellectual sword from Su Li. But this seemingly ordinary estate clearly had an array that far surpassed his current cultivation level. Let alone finding where Zhixiu was imprisoned, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had even somewhat forgotten the path he had taken to enter. Just at this moment a voice rang out. Surpassing cultivation levels at ethereal opening to defeat star condensation, this is the first time in 10 years that something like this has happened. This will assuredly shock the entire continent. Right now, you are in high spirits, your sword intent at its peak, and you drove straight into the main alley of the Northern Military Department. From a military point of view, this is very good. Isn't charging through a pass on a single horse a type of marching an army? But I've never heard that you were skilled in this. Now that I think about it, it was probably Su Li who taught you this on the road. The voice was very calm, very ordinary, but for some reason, upon hearing this person's voice, Chen Chongqing and the other 2 felt like they had seen a sea of blood. In this sea of blood, countless women and children were weeping in despair, gradually sinking into oblivion. Chen Chongqing knew that this was an illusion, so he was not nervous, even though he did not understand why this person had created this scene for him to see. With a slight movement of his spiritual sense, like a cool breeze, he awoke and gazed at the middle-aged man that had suddenly appeared in the small courtyard. The middle-aged man was naturally Zhou Tong. His face was pale, as if he had not seen the sun for many years. His expression was calm, like that of a village teacher. His lips were extremely thin, making him seem especially callous. He wore an official's robe, but there was no trace of an official's prestige, only a thick stench of blood. Chapter 450. The small courtyard was deathly still. Chen Chongqing had seen Zhou Tong before, and not just once. But this was his first time truly seeing Zhou Tong. He saw the real Zhou Tong. He saw Zhou Tong's pale face, his lips as thin as knives, and his crimson official's robe as red as blood. He sensed an unimaginably terrifying qi, and the stench of blood grew thicker and thicker, as if it was real. His gaze finally fell on Zhou Tong's hands. Those hands were very slender and their fingernails were very clean. There was not a speck of dirt, much less blood. But he knew that these hands had killed countless members of the Chern imperial clan and officials loyal to the imperial clan, and had even dug out the eyes and hearts of countless people. Chen Chongqing felt his heart beat faster and faster, and then he suddenly had a thought. Zhou Tong's hands were very suitable for wielding swords. So he replied, "Senior Suli even taught me the sword on the road." The sword was used to kill. Words were like swords, breaking through the opponent's power. Chen Chongqing did not understand these things, but he very naturally responded. On the tens of thousands of li journey back south, the things Suli had taught him had always remained in his body, constantly displaying their effects. Tang 36 and Xianyuan Po woke up, their faces vigilant. Zhou Tong silently smiled. The remnant blossoms on the crabapple tree began to fall, a few of them landing on Chen Chongqing's shoulder. The sinister pressure in the small courtyard instantly vanished without a trace, and the thick stench of blood disappeared, leaving behind only the faint fragrance of flowers. No one said anything. After a while, Zhou Tong looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "Not greeting this official is being rude." Silence. Just as Chen Chongqing was thinking about how to respond, the silent Tang 36 suddenly spoke. "What is your identity? What is your status?" As he asked this question, he stared into Zhou Tong's eyes like he was staring at a dangerous viper. Zhou Tong slightly narrowed his eyes. He had not expected that this young master of the Tang clan would actually have the courage to question him, and be so rude. Not waiting for his reply, Tang 36 continued, "Chen Chongqing is the principal of the Orthodox Academy. In terms of status, he is only below His Holiness the Pope in the Orthodoxy, and His Excellency is only a chief official of the Department for Purging Officials, a trifling second rank. Even if the Divine Empress bestowed kindness upon His Excellency and bestowed the title of Duke of the third rank, how could His Excellency be mentioned on the same level as my principal? If there is a need to greet, it should be Milord first." Zhou Tong looked at Tang 36 and said with a faint smile, "Even your father does not dare to speak to me like this." Tang 36 said, "That's why Grandpa said that my father is not as good as me." Zhou Tong said, "If that's the case, shouldn't I be the one to greet first?" There was no emotion on Tang 36's face. He was not frivolous, not proud, not proud. He was just extremely calm and focused. He said, "Of course." Zhou Tong raised his brows and said, "If that's the case, it should be you first." Tang 36 said, "Xianyuan and I are his students, we are accompanying him." Zhou Tong asked, "With whom?" Tang 36 said, "Follow the headmaster. I am the dean." Chen Chongqing finally caught up to the rhythm of the two and very formally introduced himself. "I am the principal of the Tradition Academy, Chen Chongqing." Zhou Tong was silent for a very long time, and then he lightly tidied his official robe. The red official robe was particularly eye-catching among the fragrant crabapple flowers. Then, he clasped his hands in greeting and asked, "Dean Chen, what business do you have here today?" "Wo Fujishio is a student of the Tradition Academy." Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, "I have come to take him back." The small courtyard was quiet and secluded, while the government office of the Department for Purging Officials was already heavily guarded. Countless people had already gathered outside the alley to the north. The entire capital was in a tense mood. Everyone knew why Chen Chongqing had come to see Zhou Tong today. But probably no one could have imagined that Chen Chongqing would so calmly and naturally state his request. because he had already confirmed his identity. He was the principal of the Tradition Academy and Jishyo was a student of the Tradition Academy. For the principal to care for his own student was a matter of heaven and earth. It was a matter of heaven and earth that even Zhou Tong sighed, thinking, just how many things has that monster Su Li taught this youth? Then he smiled and said, according to the imperial court's request, I have imprisoned Wofu Jishyo. In order to release him, Din Chen requires the Divine Empress's decree or the documents from the Court of Judicial Review and the Ministry of Justice. Ever since the Department for Purging Officials appeared, the Court of Judicial Review and the Ministry of Justice had become decorations, or perhaps vassals of the Department for Purging Officials. As long as Zhou Tong did not nod his head, the Court of Judicial Review and the Ministry of Justice could not close any case. I have been well versed in the Taoist canon since I was a child, Chen Chongqing suddenly said. Tang 36 and Xian Yuanpa glanced at him, thinking, why is he saying this now? Zhou Tong knew that he still had something to say, so he quietly waited. Chen Chongqing looked at him and continued, I have confirmed that Your Excellency directly took over the case of the Garden of Zhou from the Li Palace. The Ministry of Justice and the Court of Judicial Review simply did not file it. Zhou Tong asked, so what? Chen Chongqing replied, I am well versed in the Taoist canon and know the laws of the Great Zhou like the back of my hand. I am very sure that there is no law that supports Your Excellency's continued imprisonment of Wofu Jishyo. Zhou Tong silently smiled at him. Chen Chongqing said, Your Excellency, please release him. Zhou Tong took out a snow-white handkerchief from his sleeve and lightly wiped the corner of his mouth. His movements were very elegant, but his words were very taunting. Our future pope is actually so impatient. One cannot help but worry for the future of the orthodoxy. Whether it was because of Zhou Tong's actions or because of those words, Tang 36's brow creased. I promised Your Eminence that I would wait another 2 days, but... Chen Chongqing fell silent for a while, then continued, he's dead, so I don't need to wait any longer. Zhou Tong calmly looked at him and said, I think you have forgotten one thing. Jishyo's crime is colluding with the demons. As long as I have this crime, I can imprison him for as long as I want. Your Excellency seems to have also forgotten one thing. The people accused of colluding with the demons in the Garden of Zhou are 3, Jishyo, Qi Jian, and me. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said seriously, if Milord really believes that Jishyo is colluding with the demons, then the first thing Milord needs to do right now is to imprison me. If not, then you should release him. The small courtyard became incomparably quiet, even deathly still. Only the sound of falling flowers and breathing could be heard. This was the choice he had left Zhou Tong, release Jishyo or capture him as well. Zhou Tong's eyes slowly narrowed, gradually turning into willow leaves. It also seemed like the willow leaf blade that he was most proficient in. His voice drifted out from his thin lips. It was the same, and it was even colder. Are you threatening this official? After a day of running, I've just sat down, and I'm almost as hungry as a ghost in Zhou prison. Chapter 451. Not all milk was tasty, and not all people would be scared into silence by a single sentence from Zhou Tong. For example, there were some young people in the world who would not. If it was Go Hanshi, after hearing Zhou Tong's words brimming with killing intent, he would probably very warmly say, Milord, you misunderstand, I just want to help you solve your problem. If Qiushan Jun had heard Zhou Tong's words, he would probably have laughed and said, Yes, my lord, you did not misunderstand, I am threatening my lord. If it was the usual Tang 36, he would have said, Idiot, I'm threatening you. What can you do? It was somewhat regrettable, but also somewhat fortunate, that Zhou Tong spoke to Chen Chongqing and not Tang 36. Chen Chongqing's reaction was very much in line with his temperament. He quietly stood in place, looking into Zhou Tong's eyes. He didn't add fuel to the fire, but he also didn't have any intention of backing down. The cold chi under the crabapple tree gradually vanished. Zhou Tong looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "If I'm not wrong, from the moment you entered the Northern Military's department, you were very nervous." Chen Chongqing thought about it. This wasn't shameful and there was no need to hide it. He said, "Yes." Zhou Tong said, "But you still came." Chen Chongqing said, "Yes." Zhou Tong said, "Then you should be mentally prepared that I won't let him go." Chen Chongqing said, "Yes." Zhou Tong raised his brows and said with interest, "I really want to know how you prepared." Chen Chongqing remained silent for a very long time before finally coming to a decision. He looked at Zhou Tong and said seriously, "If milord doesn't release him, I'll prepare to kidnap him." The courtyard became silent once more. The crabapple flowers slowly fell to the ground. Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Po looked at Chen Chongqing. No one knew what they were thinking. No one knew if their hearts were in turmoil, but at least they didn't show it on their faces. Zhou Tong was also looking at Chen Chongqing. This time he was looking very seriously. Chen Chongqing's eyes were clear and calm, so it was easy to see his thoughts, even the deepest thoughts. Zhou Tong looked at it seriously, so he could easily see that Chen Chongqing was serious. He wasn't joking when he said that. If Zhixiu could not leave Zhou prison today, he really would try to snatch him away. The problem was that it was a joke. Zhou Tong laughed, then shook his head. This was the Zhou estate, the garden of Zhou, the Zhou prison. This was the most heavily guarded place in the great Zhou dynasty, not inferior to the imperial palace. Who knew how many experts were hidden in the surroundings of this beautiful residence? The streets in front and behind it were also heavily guarded by the imperial court's soldiers. Even Wang Pu of Tianliang had no way of snatching people here, let alone them. Yes, these three young people were very talented cultivation geniuses, but they were still young. At least for now, they did not have the power to fight against the world. There wasn't even a need for the experts of the imperial court hidden in the shadows to appear. Only Zhou Tong needed to move a finger and Chen Chongqing and the other two would be unable to leave this small courtyard. Zhou Tong didn't pay any more attention to them. With his hands behind his back, he walked towards the north wing of the small courtyard. The bright red official robe was still very eye-catching in the light rain of falling petals, even dazzling. In Chen Chongqing's eyes there was only this red official robe, just like the sea of blood that previously filled the world. Zhou Tong had his back to him. This sort of disregard would probably make many people feel humiliated, but it would only make him even calmer. It was very clear that Zhou Tong simply did not care if he acted or not, or even believed that he would act. Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Po looked at him, waiting for his decision. From start to finish, from the Orthodox Academy to the Department for Purging officials, they had not communicated at all, but they had never hesitated or wavered. Chen Chongqing wanted to come to the Department for Purging officials, so they followed. Chen Chongqing wanted to see Zhou Tong, so they followed. If Chen Chongqing said he would act now, they would naturally follow. "Milord, please wait." Chen Chongqing's voice finally rang out. At the same time, his hand gripped the hilt of his sword. The sword's name was stainless, just like the person. Tang 36 took in a deep breath and circulated his true essence. His right hand gripped the hilt of the Wenshui sword, while his left hand gripped a magical artifact in his sleeve. Xian Yuan turned his head to search for a suitable weapon, his gaze ultimately falling on the crabapple tree to his left. He thought, although it's a little thin, it can be used. Zhou Tong stopped, but he did not turn around. His crimson official robe lightly swayed in the wind. A sea suffused with the stench of blood instantly drowned the entire courtyard, sinister and terrifying to the extreme. Rumble! Thunder boomed. It was not that someone in the courtyard had attacked, but that the thunderous sound of hooves could be heard from outside the courtyard. Even the ground was trembling. Soon after, the nervous shouts of the officials of the Department for Purging officials could be heard everywhere. It was the Orthodoxy cavalry. You can't mobilize the Orthodoxy's cavalry. Zhou Tong turned around and thoughtfully said to Chen Chongqing. In the entire capital, there were not many things that could escape his eyes. From the moment it was confirmed that the Orthodox Academy's carriage might be headed for the alley of the Northern Military Department, countless relevant intelligence reports had been sent to this place. He was keenly aware that Chen Chongqing had not arranged any contingency plans. He had relied on his victory over Zhou Ziheng, his sword intent, to directly charge into this place. It has nothing to do with me. Chen Chongqing truly could not mobilize the Orthodoxy cavalry. These Orthodoxy cavalry were directly under the command of the Li Palace and possessed extremely powerful fighting strength. Zhou Tong suddenly recalled a certain day last year. On that day, the entire capital had besieged the Orthodox Academy, and the area in front of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had been packed with people. Then, the Orthodoxy cavalry arrived. Like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, they cruelly and forcefully cleared the area. Many people had died on that day. It was also from that day onwards that many people understood that the Archbishop of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, who seemed like he could fall asleep at any moment, actually possessed such high prestige within the Orthodoxy and so much hidden strength. From the looks of it, these Orthodoxy cavalry that had just arrived were probably one of the legacies left behind for Chen Chongqing by that old man who had just passed away. Zhou Tong expressionlessly said to Chen Chongqing, "You know what the result will be if you attack me." Chen Chongqing replied, "I will die." Zhou Tong replied, "In front of me, even if you want to die, it won't be that easy." Chen Chongqing replied, "No, I naturally have a way to die." For some reason, Zhou Tong suddenly became somewhat angry. "Then why don't you go die?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Your Excellency, you've never acted. Presumably you're afraid that we really will die." Zhou Tong sneered, "What do I have to be afraid of? Just now, Your Excellency said that I was threatening you, so you should be clear that if I want to threaten you, there is only one method." Chen Chongqing continued, "I'll stake my life on the line, and then we'll see whether in the eyes of those powerful figures, my life is more important or Your Excellency's." It was the beginning of summer, and as the sun gradually rose into the sky, the quiet and secluded courtyard became somewhat stuffy and hot. The sound of cicadas came from some place in the distance, somewhat vexing. Just like Zhou Tong's current mood. When he learned that Prince Chen Lu had arrived and Mao Chuyu had also arrived outside the alley, this vexation reached its peak. Went to see a play. Chapter 452. The capital was especially lively today. Not long after dawn, the battle at the gate of Orthodox Academy began. Chen Chongqing surpassed his cultivation level and defeated Zhou Ziheng. This matter could already be said to be shocking enough. But no one would have thought that he would do something even more shocking. He had brought the remaining 2 students of the Orthodox Academy and driven a carriage straight into Zhou prison. It was rumored that he was currently in a standoff with that terrifying Lord Zhou Tong. The Orthodox Academy wanted him. Zhou Tong refused to release him. Upon learning of this news, many people of the capital rushed over to watch the excitement. However, unlike the excitement of the morning, Zhou prison's fiendish aura was too heavy and its image among the common people was too sinister. No one dared to get too close. Thus, when those 500 Orthodoxy cavalry howled through the streets, they did not accidentally injure anyone. Soon after, a head eunuch from the imperial palace arrived, followed by the deputy prime minister and Mao Chuyu. Finally, the carriage from the royal prince's mansion arrived. No one entered Zhou prison, not even the alley. Prince Chen Lu dismounted from the carriage and glanced at the 500 Orthodoxy cavalry. He imperceptibly creased his brow, then turned to Mao Chuyu and gave a bitter smile. "This matter has caused too much of a ruckus. Today's matter had indeed blown up too much. Everyone knew that the Orthodoxy's new rule regarding the all-school martial exhibition was the imperial court, or more accurately, the Tianhai clan and those two archbishops loyal to the Divine Empress, suppressing the Orthodox Academy. But no one had expected the Orthodox Academy to react to this matter so fiercely and so quickly. It had just obtained victory in its first battle, but it immediately went to Zhou prison. They wanted him. The former principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Mao Chuyu, was now the Templar Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons, standing among the 6 giants. His presence unquestionably represented the attitude of the Li Palace. The problem was that even such an important figure was standing outside the alley, not entering. Everyone knew that the relationship between the Divine Empress and the Li Palace had undergone a massive change in the last year. They were gradually drifting apart, but on the surface, they still maintained a calm relationship. While the two saints remained silent, no one wanted or dared to make the situation even more tense and out of control, because no one was willing to bear that terrifying outcome. Until the carriage of the Orthodox Academy entered this alley. If something really did happen in that small courtyard today, then the capital and even the entire human world would be in big trouble. In the small courtyard, Tang 36 looked at Zhou Tong very seriously, or even sincerely, and said, "My lord, I have to tell you the truth. Chen Chongsheng's life is really very good, it can be said to be indescribably precious. I don't know what the Divine Empress will think, but in His Holiness the Pope's eyes, Your Excellency's life is assuredly not as precious as Chen Chongsheng's. If he really did die in Zhou prison today, do you think His Holiness the Pope would spare Your Excellency? And what will Her Ladyship think of you? Indescribably noble?" Zhou Tong looked at Chen Chongsheng with slightly narrowed eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking. Tang 36 continued, "Moreover, Sir might not understand him. At times, he really is very stubborn, very stupid. He really is capable of exchanging his own life for Zheshio's. In the end, you're still threatening me." Zhou Tong felt a great deal of emotion and said, "Is it because there have been fewer stories about me in Jingdou recently that no one is afraid of me anymore?" Tang 36 smiled and said, "You can think whatever you want." Zhou Tong coldly rebuked, "Can any of you bear the consequences of this matter?" Chen Chongsheng replied, "It's not that I want to be the principal of the Orthodox Academy, but I don't believe that I need to bear the consequences." The meaning of these words was very clear. He was the principal of the Orthodox Academy and Zheshio was a student on the Orthodox Academy's register. Zheshio had been imprisoned in Zhou prison for far too long, so he naturally had to rescue Zheshio. As for the deeper meaning hidden behind the curtain, he truly did not understand, nor did he want to think about it. Thus, he only needed to bear the consequences that a principal should bear in order to protect a student. As for whether this matter would give rise to any other serious consequences, it was naturally the responsibility of the person who had made him the principal of the Orthodox Academy and the person who had made Zhou Tong imprison Zheshio. To put it another way, if a storm really did arise in the small courtyard today, if the imperial court and the Li Palace became like fire and water, even if the world fell into chaos, the demons seized the opportunity to invade, the people became destitute and homeless, even if the human race was enslaved for 10,000 years, it would all be the fault of the Pope and the Divine Empress. The small courtyard once more became incomparably quiet. Zhou Tong had no idea that this was Chen Chongsheng's meaning. He slightly narrowed his eyes, the chill suddenly deepening, and the petals on the ground were covered in a layer of frost. Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Po looked at Chen Chongsheng with deep admiration. The Li Palace, the great hall of light. Countless statues of sages, some solemn and some sacred, exuded a faint radiance as they gazed at the sky outside the hall. The Pope was also gazing at the sky, his expression calm. It was like he had not heard what Chen Chongsheng had done or said. How can someone like Chen Chongsheng, who does not understand the greater good, inherit the orthodoxy? The speaker was Daoist Siyuan, the master of the Hall of Subjugation. Standing next to him was Linghai Jiwang, the master of the Hall of Heavenly Judgment. As the youngest of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects, as well as the 2 most powerful Sacred Hall archbishops, they were still respectful to the Pope, but their words were very direct. Perhaps it was also because they were only a step away from the divine domain and could already see the Pope's back. When the entire continent believed that these 2 archbishops continued to support the divine empress and were unwilling to stand on the Pope's side, it was because they held an unquenchable enmity and distrust towards the Chern imperial clan. They had not imagined that besides this, an even more important reason was that the Pope had decided to entrust the future of the Orthodoxy to that young man called Chen Chongsheng. The 2 Sacred Hall archbishops could disregard secular authority, but they could not disregard the divine succession. Linghai Jiwang expressionlessly said, "The Holy Maiden's message clearly states that there is hope for that matter to succeed. This means that there is a reason for pressuring Mount Li, and that Zhou Tong has performed meritorious service in this matter." The Pope remained calm, saying nothing. Taoists see you inside. My Holiness should clearly understand that neither the ownership of the divine staff nor the imperial throne is a reason for us to oppose My Holiness. Our unease lies in the fact that My Holiness and the Empress still have several decades to live. Why is My Holiness in such a rush to make a decision? This decision still referred to the ownership of the divine staff and the imperial throne. Linghai Jiwang's face remained expressionless, but his voice was like the deepest and serene ocean, containing an unimaginable might. As for Zhou Tong, just kill him. All his crimes are his own. He should have long since understood what his mission was. Just a moment ago, he had said that Zhou Tong had performed a great service. Now, he had said that if there was a problem in that small courtyard, just kill Zhou Tong. In the next moment, a somewhat uneasy and panicked voice came from outside the Great Hall of Light. In the main alley of the Northern Military Department, something that no one expected had occurred. Zhou Tong had actually released Zhou Tong. There will be an update tomorrow. I plan to write it on the plane. One write for 3,000 li, what sort of heaven-exploding style? Chapter 453. In the Church of Light, the Archbishop was thinking of a dark slaughter. In order to resolve this conflict caused by the youths of the Orthodox Academy, in order to give this matter a conclusion that everyone could accept, if the Pope no longer protected Chen Chongsheng, Zhou Tong could naturally die. However, Zhou Tong was no ordinary person. Just when everyone believed that the small courtyard filled with drifting crabapple blossoms had reached an impasse, he was still unwilling to accept the conclusion arranged by someone else. He gave the world an unexpected conclusion. The Pope drew back his gaze from the sky and turned to Linghai Jiwang, faintly smiling. Linghai Jiwang's voice suddenly shattered, like countless dark seawater instantly bursting into white foam. Just what does he want to do? Many years ago, my older sister was raped and killed by the son of a prince. Yes, not the heir, nor was he some favored son. He was just a very ordinary son, the son of a concubine. I'm even willing to bet that the prince didn't even know if he had this son or not, because he was like a breeding pig, having 40-some sons and a pile of daughters. But in short, he was surnamed Chen. Zhou Tong looked at Chen Chongsheng, his eyes very cold, but in their depths was a sliver of tyrannical memories. How could the imperial court care about such a minor matter? The capital government and the warden's office did not dare to go to the prince's estate to capture him? Thus, this matter was gradually forgotten by everyone. In the end, only I was left to remember how heavy the rain was that day, how many wounds were left on my older sister's naked body by wild beasts. Yes, it was very difficult to forget. If you were me, what would you do? The crabapple blossoms in the small courtyard had fallen, covering the ground like snow, but there was also a hint of blood mixed within. Chen Chongsheng and the other 2 did not know why he was bringing up these old matters, nor did they know how to respond. Of course I would kill Zhou Tong calmly said. In order to kill that prince's son, yes, at the time, I even wanted to kill that prince as well. I prepared for a very long time, prepared to use my life to exchange for a moment of pleasure, but just when I was prepared to charge into the prince's estate, I was stopped by a person. That person was the Empress. He gazed in the direction of the imperial palace, his eyes abnormally complicated. After a long period of silence, he continued to murmur, "The Empress told me that the mark of an immature person is that he is willing to die a heroic death for a certain reason. The mark of a mature person is that he is willing to live humbly for a certain reason." Zhou Tong withdrew his gaze and looked towards Chen Chongqing, calmly and seriously saying, "Do you understand?" Chen Chongqing seriously thought about it, then shook his head and said, "I understand, but I can't do it." Zhou Tong laughed and said, "Who can do it?" I didn't agree with the Empress's words, so I still pulled out my saber and charged into the mansion. Fortunately, the Empress only used one finger to knock me out. Tang 36 asked, "And then?" Zhou Tong said, "Later on, I naturally understood, so I began to endure, and endured for a very long time." Tang 36 remembered a certain bloody case in the capital that shocked the entire continent. He had some suspicions, but he wasn't sure. He asked, finally, "In the end, of course, I killed that person and that prince. Of course, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Of course, the entire mansion was killed by me. Their 40-odd sons and daughters, even if they were as fertile as pigs, how could they compare to the speed at which they were killed?" The Empress truly was correct. I humbly, even lowly, lived a few more years before finally being able to accomplish my goal. Zhou Tong laughed like a child. He was very happy and naive, so he felt that it was very cruel. Xian Yuanpa opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. He felt that the little courtyard had suddenly become cold. Tang 36 confirmed that it really was the case of the entire family of King Qi Shan's mansion being executed, but he remained silent. Chen Chongqing suddenly said, "I think that the you back then who held a saber and prepared to charge into the mansion was better than the you later on." As he said this, he very seriously looked into Zhou Tong's eyes. Zhou Tong asked, "Even if it was immature or even stupid?" Chen Chongqing said, "There are some things, and sometimes it is better to be immature." Zhou Tong was quiet for a very long time, and then he suddenly began to laugh. He turned and walked towards the back of the courtyard, the two sleeves of his crimson official's gown lightly lifting up a red and white flower petal. The side gate of the courtyard creaked open, and several officials of the department for purging officials walked out, carrying a stretcher. Zhixiu lay on the stretcher, his face pale and his eyes tightly shut. Zhou Tong had imprisoned Zhixiu in Zhou prison for so many days. No matter how much pressure the Li Palace and Star Caesar Academy exerted, he had turned a blind eye to them. This was because this was the will of the Divine Empress, and it was also to exert pressure on Mount Li. Just as he had said to Chen Chongqing, Zhixiu's presence in Zhou prison meant that the case in the Garden of Zhou had not been concluded. The Mount Li sword sect, which had just escaped its internal strife, would assuredly have to pay a little for this matter. To the great Zhou this was naturally a good thing. Of course, he was not willing to release Zhixiu for a deeper reason, but he could not tell anyone. Just like at this moment, no one knew that he had actually been prepared to release Zhixiu a long time ago. "But, Your Excellency, why did you agree to release him?" In the coldest room of the department for purging officials, Priest Xian asked in confusion. Priest Xian. No one could have imagined that the person that Archbishop Mei Lisha had trusted the most in the last few months would actually appear here. Moreover, it was very obvious that he had an unusual relationship with Zhou Tong. Just who was he? Why didn't you release him? The pressure on Mount Li should have been enough. I originally wanted to see how the Li Palace would react, but it turned out that a saint like His Holiness the Pope was truly not someone that I could scheme against, but at least I saw with my own eyes what sort of person he was. Zhou Tong closed his eyes and thought back to that clean youth he had seen under the crabapple tree. Priest Xin thought to himself, the definition of maturity and immaturity that Your Excellency had just spoken of was extremely reasonable and extremely difficult to deal with. He had originally believed that Chen Chongqing's answer had touched Your Excellency's soul for Your Excellency to agree to release him. Touched? Zhou Tong seemed to have the ability to read the mind. He opened his eyes and expressionlessly said, "This official has never had an elder sister, so who can be moved? And whose answer can move me?" Priest Xin shook his head. Before His Eminence passed away, he was always reading this book. As he spoke, he took out a book from his bosom and handed it over. Zhou Tong took it and realized that it was the famed Scroll of Time of the Orthodoxy. As he gazed at this book, he thought of the youth under the crabapple tree and fell silent for a very long time. He had spoken the truth to Priest Xin. He had never been willing to release Jishio precisely because he wanted to use these two crabapple trees and the murderous aura of Zhou prison to carefully and seriously examine Chen Chongqing from head to toe, from inside to outside. To him, this was the most important matter, even more important than Jishio and the cold intent of those two archbishops to erase him, because he wanted to see a period of time on Chen Chongqing's body. The Qing kingdom is very windy and the plane can't land. I left at 7 in the morning and am still stuck in Changchun Airport. What is this so-called why? I actually wrote an update. I love myself. Chapter 454. It was unknown whether or not Zhou Tong had seen that passage of time on Chen Chongqing's body. At this moment, he was looking at the scroll of time in his hands. The Scroll of Time was also known as the Canon of Flowing West. It was the most important and at the same time the most profound and incomprehensible of the Taoist scriptures of the Orthodoxy. It took the meaning of the river flowing west and could not be slowed. It spoke of the wondrous attainments of the Taoist sect related to time. Mei Lisha had not forgotten to look at this Taoist scripture before his death. What did this mean? Zhou Tong gazed at those cryptic and incomprehensible words in the canon of Flowing West and silently pondered. Priest Xin continued to narrate what had happened in that room filled with plum blossoms. He said that Principal Shang was a very extraordinary person. Zhou Tong slightly narrowed his eyes, his gaze suddenly becoming cold and sharp. When a person was on the verge of death, their words had to be believed. An extraordinary priest like Mei Lisha had long ago become indifferent to life and death. Why did he look at this Taoist scripture before his death? Why did he suddenly mention that person who had vanished for many years? Priest Xin paused for a moment, recalling the bishop's final sigh. He said that he was very curious as to how the life of the next pope would be recorded in the Taoist scripture. Zhou Tong's eyebrows rose. There was no wind in the quiet room, but his red official's gown began to rise and fall, like a sea of blood had come to the mortal world. The exterior depended on the state of mind. This was proof of the mental impact that Priest Xin had relayed to him, because he had faintly grasped a clue from these words and this book. The next pope? The entire continent knew that, unless something too extraordinary occurred, the next pope of the Orthodoxy would assuredly be Chen Chongqing. As the staunchest promoter of this matter, Mei Lisha naturally would not have any other thoughts. So why was he curious about the records of Chen Chongqing's life and found this matter very interesting? Or did he believe that the future history books would have a different view of this matter? Just what was this matter? What was the most important thing in one's life? Meritorious deeds or moral cultivation? Zhou Tong's official's gown began to flutter more and more intensely. The room was filled with the stench of blood, countless waves rising from the sea of blood, just like his current mood. Priest Xion's face was deathly pale. He was almost unable to endure this terrifying pressure, but he also did not dare to retreat. Suddenly, all the pressure vanished without a trace. Zhou Tong's raised eyebrows slowly calmed down, his eyes no longer sharp. his official's robe draped over his body, an unfathomable smile appearing on his face. Do you know what is the most important thing in a person's life? The most important thing? Priest Exayan could not understand why the Lord would suddenly ask such a question. The smile on Zhou Tong's face became more and more sincere, like a blooming flower, but when matched with his sinister qi, it seemed more and more strange. The most important thing in one's life is not one's realm of cultivation, nor is it one's power or authority, but the date of one's birth and death. He walked to the door and gazed at the two crabapple trees. Listening to the rumbling of wheels coming from the even further alley, he said, whether it's the classics of the orthodoxy or the history books, in order to record a person's life, the first thing that needs to be confirmed, and also the first thing that must be clearly written in the first sentence, is the year and month of your birth, as well as the place. Only by confirming this information can we determine just who that person is. Priest Exayan walked behind him, not knowing how to respond. He could faintly sense that although Zhou Tong appeared very calm, he was actually very nervous in the depths of his heart. What matter or discovery could make a terrifying figure like Zhou Tong so nervous? The crabapple blossoms have already withered, the great prison has its own divine might, but he stands within it, unmoving like a lake. Zhou Tong's eyes narrowed again, but this time they were not as sharp as swords. Instead, they were filled with confusion and unease that even he himself did not notice. Priest Exayan also wanted to know if the Lord had achieved his most important goal by arranging such a large array, other than clearly seeing the intentions of certain important figures. Zhou Tong wanted to see what kind of person Chen Chongsheng was, or rather, he wanted to see what kind of person Chen Chongsheng was. It was just that it was usually said to be unmoving like a mountain, so why did he use the words unmoving like a lake to evaluate Chen Chongsheng? He's very similar to a person. Zhou Tong's face suddenly revealed a hint of fear. He's very similar to the Qin Xuanba in the secret records of the palace. Priest Exayan did not understand. In the history books and folklore, Chen Xuanba was the strongest expert of the Chen imperial clan in the past 1,000 years, on par with Emperor Taizong. He had always been famous for being violent and crude, so how was he similar to Chen Chongsheng? And why did he say it was the Chen Xuanba in the secret records of the palace? The Lord naturally had the opportunity to come into contact with those secret records of the palace. Perhaps the Chen Xuanba recorded in those records was different from the Chen Xuanba in the rumors? Our mighty Emperor Taizong changed all the history books and the Taoist canons that could be changed, so Chen Xuanba naturally became a crude martial artist who did not understand the bigger picture, Zhou Tong said with a mocking tone, who could have imagined that the real Chen Xuanba was actually a very quiet person. Priest Exayan felt that these two unrecognized evaluations were somewhat familiar, and then he remembered. These were the evaluations that the Lord had made of Chen Chongsheng not too long ago. Zhou Tong fell silent for a while, then said, Chen Chongsheng is also a very quiet person. The silence here represented many meanings. For example, when there was no need to speak, he did not speak. He was clumsy in speech but quick in action. He was calm in his heart. He was calm in the face of a major event. The small courtyard was quiet for a very long time. Zhou Tong finally said, in addition, he is also surnamed Chen. Priest Exayan left, carrying an enormous psychological pressure and fear as he left the alley of the Northern Military Department. This psychological pressure had nothing to do with his dual identities, but came from the information that Zhou Tong had faintly revealed. Could Chen Chongsheng really be a descendant of the imperial clan? He did not dare to think about it, much less think about it too deeply. This was because it was very obvious that even Lord Zhou Tong had become nervous because of this matter. Zhou Tong truly was very nervous, because he knew much more than Priest Exayan. Moreover, with his status he had to think about these matters, and he had to think about them clearly. He stood on the stone steps of the small courtyard, gazing at the two crabapple trees whose flowers were about to wither. He silently thought for a very long time, paying no attention to the clamor outside the courtyard. Before Mei Lisha died, he had said that the traitor Shang was a very extraordinary person. Before Mei Lisha died, he had read the canon of Flowing West, and watched time flow like water. Yes, the traitor Shang could help the Empress change her fate, but what did stopping an infant from growing for 4 years count for? Perhaps Qin Chongqing was just a youth who had matured? But to be so obscure and dull, so old, could he really be a 16-year-old youth? The age of the disciple that the traitor Shang had taken away from Xining village did match, and it was said that he was crippled and mute, which was more in line with the rumors. But that was too conspicuous, too clear, and thus too untrustworthy. Or perhaps that disciple was a method to deceive the heavenly Tao. Had the true person's lifespan long since been altered by the traitor Shang using the canon of Flowing West? Zhou Tong felt his body grow colder and colder. He knew that the chief eunuch most trusted by the Empress had been investigating that old case in the palace for the last several months. The Empress not having him investigate did not mean that she no longer trusted him, only that the Empress did not want anyone to know of this matter. Crown Prince Xiaoming really might still be alive. If the Empress really had defied the heavens and changed her fate, and if it was just as the rumors said, she had paid an unimaginably bitter price for the sake of doing so, she was doomed to die without descendants, her bloodline completely gone. Only then could she truly become a person cut off from the world. If Crown Prince Xiaoming was still alive, that meant that the Empress's change of fate had not truly ended. At the very least, it meant that the Empress's change of fate still had a weakness. If all of this was true, then did it mean that Crown Prince Xiaoming's existence had to be wiped out before everything could return to peace? Zhou Tong felt the temperature of the small courtyard lower and lower. It was clearly the beginning of summer, but it seemed like it was about to enter a harsh winter. Even he, the most cold-blooded and terrifying in the eyes of the world, couldn't help but feel that this was too cruel when he thought of those stories from back then and what might happen now. But why had those people sent Qin Chongqing to the capital? Did they think they could hide it from the Empress forever? Could they hide it from me? Zhou Tong's complexion turned extremely unsightly. He realized that there were still many things that could not be clearly explained in this riddle. The divine Empress stood on the dew platform, gazing at the sky. In the early morning, the sky was azure. Later on, a fight had occurred at the gate of the Orthodox Academy and the carriage had gone to the department for purging officials. A cloud had drifted over from some place, and the sky had turned gray and hazy. The gloomy sky seemed to cover all the truth, but how could it cover her eyes? The vast majority of people in the world were unable to see the stars in the daytime, but she could. It was just that she had never liked looking at them in the daytime, because it would make her think of Emperor Xian, think of Taizong, think of many people surnamed Chen. Now that she was looking at the sky, it was precisely because of a youth surnamed Chen. She knew that Zhou Tong had guessed at something, investigated something, and began to grow suspicious. This was why the capital was bustling with activity today. She did not care about this, much less get angry, because there were many things that she was not certain of. The stars in the daytime were hidden behind the radiance of the sun, but compared to the stars in the night sky, their positions had not changed in the slightest. She quietly looked at the fated star that belonged to her, the brightest star in the sky. She quietly thought about how, hundreds of years ago, she had used an unimaginable power to change the position of that star. At the same time, she had changed the brightness of that star. Naturally, the countless stars around that star had changed as well. The change in the fate of a single person would ultimately affect countless people, even the fate of the entire world. With 2 flaps of a butterfly's wings, the great western continent would give birth to a storm, let alone when she proudly stood in the clouds. But when all these fates were gathered together, just what sort of power was it that determined them? Was it the heavenly Tao? If Xiaoming really was still alive, what sort of retribution would she face from the heavenly Tao? If Xiaoming had already died, what sort of retribution would she face from the heavenly Tao? Several hundred years ago, when she made a sacrifice to the starry sky, she had furiously and unyieldingly rebuked the heavenly Tao Academy. At the time, she was angry, despairing, and heartbroken. She had no love or hate for this world, so she was so powerful that not even the heavenly Tao dared to look her in the eye. Yet she had not imagined that Xiaoming would actually be born. From that moment she knew that she would have to directly confront the heavenly Tao, but before she had the time to do anything, the heavenly Tao had silently retreated into the darkness. Until last year, when a star radiance descended upon the Orthodox Academy and someone lit up a fated star. The heavenly Tao seemed to have come to find her. The fated star really might be the bane of one's fate. Solving question. Chapter 455. The Orthodox Academy's carriage left the main alley of the Northern Military Department as quickly as it could. The crowd gathered outside the alley had no idea what had happened. Even Mao Chuyu and Prince Chen Lu did not know what had happened in the small courtyard. The 500 Orthodoxy cavalry dispersed, leaving behind only plumes of dust. Chen Chongqing and the others were in such a hurry not because Zheshio's injuries were so severe that he could no longer endure, but because that small courtyard had left a terrifying shadow in their hearts. Zheshio lay on the stretcher, dressed in a clean set of cloth clothes. His face was pale from not seeing the sun for a long time, and he was rather thin, but there were no wounds. His condition seemed pretty good. As the carriage traveled at high speeds, the wind on the street lifted up a corner of the curtain. Tang 36 saw a corner of Zhou Prison's cornice, and his face paled slightly. He subconsciously tightened his grip on his sword hilt, completely unlike the calm demeanor he had displayed when he had been speaking with Zhou Tong in the courtyard. Zhou Prison was sinister, but the truly terrifying one was Zhou Tong himself. Chen Chongqing's head was lowered, his hair drenched in sweat. He looked like he had just done some extremely heavy physical labor. He took a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped the sweat off his face. Then he held it in his palm and wrapped it in his true essence. Before entering Zhou Prison, he had been holding this handkerchief. He very rarely sweated, and Tang 36 and Xianyuan Pa had never seen him sweat. Today's situation was special. He had anticipated that he might sweat. Only after confirming that the sweat-soaked handkerchief did not release that strange fragrance that made him uneasy did Chen Chongqing truly relax. To him, this confrontation with Zhou Tong in the small courtyard was far more hair-raising than his battle with Zhou Ziheng. Because in this confrontation, their minds had to endure a terrifying pressure. "Don't wipe your mouth," Tang 36 said to the sweating Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing paused and asked, "Why?" Tang 36 replied, "Wiping your mouth with a handkerchief like Zhou Tong did just now would make you seem very abnormal." Xianyuan Po's laughter came from the front of the carriage. That simple and honest bear youth always had such a low threshold for humor. This was not a very funny joke, and the mood in the carriage finally relaxed a little. Chen Chongqing gradually calmed down and began to examine Zheshio's injuries. He placed his finger on Zheshio's pulse and quietly listened. Suddenly, there was a muffled thump in the carriage as his finger bounced off. Tang 36 asked, "What happened?" Sudden impulse, it's his old habit. Chen Chongqing felt that there was something wrong with Zheshio's pulse. He slightly frowned, but didn't say anything. He then removed the golden needles from his fingers and undid Zheshio's collar, preparing to use the needles to take a look. As soon as he did so, his hand froze. When Tang 36 saw this, his body also froze. Chen Chongqing's fingers trembled, but he still slowly undid Zheshio's clothes, revealing his body. Yes, there was not a single wound on Zheshio's face, nor could it be seen that he had been injured or tortured, because those were all on his body. Not a single inch of his skin was intact. There were wounds and rotten flesh everywhere. Bones could even be seen in some places. In some places, even the bones had turned black. Chen Chongqing did not know how many tortures Zhixio had endured, how many poisons he had been given. He didn't want to know either, because he couldn't bear to know. There was dead silence in the carriage. "Stop!" Chen Chongqing suddenly said. Tang 36 lowered his head. His right hand had unknowingly grasped the one Shuai sword again. Xian Yuanpe did not know what had happened in the carriage. After stopping, he squeezed in and saw Zhixio's miserable state. His eyes instantly reddened and his breathing became rough and ragged. Because of his anger, his arms began to thicken and his hair like steel spikes protruded from his skin. This was the sign of his transformation. "I want to kill Zhou Tong." Chen Chongqing and Tang 36 said nothing, but they also thought this way, which was why they had yelled for the carriage to stop, which was why they had gripped the hilts of their swords. Zhixio had been tortured so wretchedly that Chen Chongqing could no longer maintain his calm and steady state of mind. Tang 36 could no longer care about his status as a descendant of a noble clan. If Liang Xiaoxiao had used his own death to accuse Zhixio of colluding with the demons, then Zhixio had been implicated by Qi Jian. But Zhou Tong had refused to release Zhixio and had used such cruel methods to torture Zhixio, then he was suffering on behalf of the Orthodox Academy. They were the Orthodox Academy, so they naturally had to take revenge for Zhixio. Just at this moment, Zhixio opened his eyes. The depths of his eyes were still the color of lemons. This was the fusion of Nank's poison and the fierce blood of the wolf tribe. But because he had been infected with too many poisons in Zhou prison, the various poisons clashed with each other. In the last few days, his vision had actually gradually recovered. Every time he awoke in Zhou prison, he would be greeted by endless pain, so when he opened his eyes, they were cold and filled with hatred. But at this moment, what he saw was not those strange torture tools that were specially designed for the demon clan, but 3 young faces that were filled with concern. In a very short amount of time, Zhixio had completely awakened, and from their expressions, he could guess what they were preparing to do. The wariness and hatred in his eyes gradually vanished, but his face remained expressionless. He said to Xian Yuanpe, "Drive." His voice was very weak, but it carried a feeling that it could not be refused. Xian Yuanpe yelled, "We're preparing to slaughter our way back to Zhou prison to take revenge for you." Zhixio expressionlessly said, "There are many kinds of barbecue in there. Do you want to make braised bear paw for them?" This was still a joke that was not funny, and this time, no one laughed. Of course, it was not because Zhixio never told jokes, so everyone was rather shocked. "But there's really no way to swallow this anger," Tang 36 said. Zhixio replied, "When you can't beat your opponent, you have to endure it. Keep your eyes on him, strengthen yourself, and then bite him to death." This was the wolf's way of survival. Chen Chongqing looked at him and sorrowfully said, "I'm sorry, it was all my fault for dragging you down." Zhixio closed his eyes and ignored him. Xian Yuanpe returned to the carriage, which continued to move. They were getting farther and farther away from Zhou prison. But the 4 youths on the carriage were keenly aware that there would be a day when they would return to this place. A cold and flat voice suddenly resounded from within the carriage. It was Zhixio's voice. His eyes were still closed. "If you think I'm too miserable, I'll pay more." Upon returning to the Orthodox Academy, the long-awaited priests of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green began to use the sacred light technique to treat Zhixio. Then Chen Chongqing personally began to treat him, cautiously using needles and knives to treat the terrible wounds on Zhixio's body. It took him an entire half a day to finish. The sky was already completely dark. Zhixio's injuries were too severe. For the convenience of treatment and to avoid moving, he did not live in one of the small buildings by the forest. He spread out a thick blanket on the wooden floor of the library and lay on the ground. Under the illumination of the lantern, Chen Chongqing looked at the directory of the Orthodox Academy, then put it back into the drawer. Looking at the wolf youth who was silently enduring the pain with his eyes closed, He remembered that in the garden of Zhishyo had said that he wanted a sword. Money. I don't have too much right now. Chen Chongqing ignored the angry gaze Tang 36 shot at him and said to Zhishyo, "But I have many swords, you can choose as you please." Chapter 456. In the garden of Zhou, the 10,000 swords had soared through the air to assist Chen Chongqing in beheading the golden-winged Great Peng and exposing Black Robe's scheme. This was because they wanted to leave that plain where the sun would never set, to return to their homeland. Chen Chongqing had made a promise to these swords, so he naturally would not go back on his word. As a result, upon returning to the capital, even though he was somewhat reluctant, he still immediately reported the matter of the sword pool to the Pope. This news temporarily did not spread among the populace, but after the Li Palace notified the various parts of the continent, it was no longer a secret. This morning, Chen Chongqing had surpassed cultivation levels to defeat the star condensation cultivator Zhou Ziheng, causing many people to begin to suspect that besides those famed swords of the past, he might have had some other fortuitous encounter in the sword pool. Otherwise, with just Su Li's guidance, how could his swordplay have progressed so quickly? Chen Chongqing did not care how much shock the news of the sword pool's appearance would cause in the continent, nor did he care how the gazes of others would change. He only felt that this matter was rather troublesome. 2 nights ago, the Li Palace had sent him an extremely long list of names. Many sects had expressed their sincere gratitude to the Li Palace and Chen Chongqing. At the same time, they had attached relevant proofs, requesting the Li Palace to return the swords of their ancestors. This list was very long, and the sword at the top was unquestionably the temple sword of Holy Maiden Peak. Behind it were many divine weapons of once illustrious fame. Chen Chongqing reorganized the swords in his sheath according to the list. He realized that although the list was long, it was still an extremely small portion of the famed swords of the sword pool. From this, it could be seen that those experts and sects that had once shaken the continent could no longer find their legacies in this world. If one viewed this matter from the perspective of history, one would undoubtedly feel a tinge of sorrow hidden behind it. It was very easy for one to sigh over the impermanence of the affairs of the world, but to him and the Orthodox Academy, this was naturally a good thing. Of the famed swords that had left the Garden of Zhou with him, there were at least 7,000 that could no longer be found. In other words, he was now the master of these swords. A crisp sound of impact rang out, and an old sword with spots of rust appeared on the floor of the library. Then, the crisp sound of metal colliding rang out. In just a short while, the originally spacious library was filled with all kinds of swords. There were so many swords, and they were so heavy together that even the floor of the library sank slightly, as if it would not be able to bear the weight. Zhishyo opened his eyes, looked over, and then found it impossible to close them again. Under the dim light, a small mountain of swords appeared in the library. He only wanted one sword from the sword pool, but Chen Chongqing brought the entire sword pool back. Tang 36 looked at the sword mountain, then looked at Chen Chongqing, and then looked at the sword mountain again. His mouth was wide open and he couldn't close it for a while. He had heard Chen Chongqing talk about how he had discovered the sword pool in the Garden of Zhou and how he had joined hands with the 10,000 swords to fight against the enemy, but when he truly saw these swords, he had a completely different feeling. Not even the wealthy Wenshui Tangs could see such a sight. He suddenly felt that although Chen Chongqing had lost a lot of money and treasures in the Garden of Zhou, he had still profited greatly from this business. Hearing the noise, Xian Yuanpa also arrived at the library. In his hand was a filthy dish towel. With a clap, the dish towel that was even larger than an ordinary apron fell to the floor, creating a splash. Chen Chongqing glanced at it and said, "I've said it many times, the dish towel has to be changed frequently." At this moment, Xian Yuanpa could not hear what he was saying. His entire body was like a little bear climbing a tree, howling as he charged at the mountain of swords. The mountain of swords did not collapse under the impact of his thick body, because he suddenly remembered that this was Chen Chongqing's. At the last moment, he stopped and turned his head to look at Chen Chongqing. He did not say anything, but his watery eyes made him seem extremely innocent and pitiful. "You want it?" Chen Chongqing asked. Xian Yuanpa nodded his head. Because his speed was too fast and his head was too big, a small breeze blew through the dark library. Chen Chongqing said, "Choose for yourself." Xian Yuanpa gave a happy cry. He extended his hand and grabbed the hilt of a sword on the mountain of swords, then forcefully pulled it out. The sound of metal scraping against metal reverberated in the quiet library. It was a pitch-black metal sword. It did not have any edge and was extremely thick, looking more like a metal club. Xian Yuanpa stared blankly. He discovered that the weight and feel of this metal sword was extremely compatible with his own strength. He even felt that this sword was originally meant for him to use. It had to be said that there really might be some sort of indescribable and mysterious connection between sword and person, or perhaps fate. It was like those invisible threads of fate that no one could ever see in the starry sky. The sword that Xian Yuanpa had casually pulled out was a heavy sword made of black iron. It was as heavy as a mountain and as mighty as the sea, hence its name, Mountain Sea Sword. The previous owner of this heavy sword was an expert called Shi Ku. It was said that this expert possessed the bloodline of the White Emperor and had never lost in his life, until he was defeated by Zhou Dufu in the Garden of Zhou. In the end, he died at the hands of a nameless person. Chen Chongqing did not think that Xian Yuanpa would take this sword. The Mountain Sea Sword was one of the most complete swords in the sword pool, second only to the Temple Sword. Moreover, because of the rumor that Shi Ku possessed the bloodline of the White Emperor, after the Li Palace confirmed that Shi Ku no longer had a legacy, he had already decided to leave the Mountain Sea Sword to Luo Luo. But at this moment, looking at Xian Yuanpa, who was unable to contain his joy, and thinking that the scene of Luo Luo holding a large metal club and randomly smashing it was truly too beautiful, he did not say anything. Tang 36 had something to say. "This is the Mountain Sea Sword. Although its blade has clearly been chopped off by Zhou Dufu's having blade, since it has reappeared, it will definitely be able to enter the tier of legendary weapons. A heavily damaged old sword, as long as it reappeared, would definitely be able to enter the tier of legendary weapons?" Tang 36 did not exaggerate. It must be known that if the famous swords in history were to be ranked, no matter how they were ranked, the Mountain Sea Sword would definitely be ranked in the top 10. Xian Yuanpa felt that something was wrong. Like a child hugging a toy, he tightly hugged the Mountain Sea Sword and vigilantly stared at Tang 36. He said, "What do you want to say? No matter what you say, I won't be tricked by you cunning humans." Tang 36 mocked. "Chen Chongqing is also a human, why aren't you afraid of being tricked by him? You even have the nerve to accept his sword?" Xian Yuanpa did not know how to respond. After a long while, he finally said, "He is my grandmaster, how can he be compared to normal people? Of course I dare to accept something my grandmaster gives me." Tang 36 sneered, "Normally you never acknowledge it, but now, for this broken sword, you're willing to be a grandson. If anyone says that your bear tribe is simple and honest, I'll get angry with them." How could Xian Yuanpa win against him? He angrily stopped talking, only hugging the Mountain Sea Sword a bit tighter. "What do you want to say?" Chen Chongqing asked. Tang 36 said, "A baby carrying a precious treasure walking through the street. What problem do you think there will be?" Chen Chongqing followed his line of sight and looked over. Xian Yuanpa's body was as thick as a small mountain. The originally extremely heavy and huge Mountain Sea Sword did not seem out of place in his embrace. But Tang 36 was right, in this dangerous human world, Xian Yuanpa was a baby, a bear cub. Currently, he was the principal of the Tradition Academy and the Pope's appointed successor. Therefore, even though they clearly knew that he carried a precious treasure, other than a few people, no one dared to do anything against him. But Xian Yuan Po was different. No matter if it was the tradition or White Emperor City, they would not make a big fuss over a normal Yao youth. If he really was a bear cub, I wouldn't care about his life or death. The problem is, this kid's recent performance is not bad. Tang 36 said, "How about this? I'll keep this mountain sea sword for you. When you can defeat me and prove that you have the ability and qualification to wield a godly weapon, I'll return this sword to you." When he said this, he looked at Xian Yuanpo. His expression was very natural and his tone was very casual. Xian Yuanpo was almost fooled, but after seeing the smile on Chen Chongqing's lips, he came back to his senses and angrily growled twice. Tang 36's little trick was seen through, but he was not angry. He stood up with a smile and took out a paper fan from somewhere. He waved it and said, "What I said is the truth. If you hold the mountain sea sword and wander around outside every day, sooner or later, you'll be beaten by someone with a stick." Xian Yuan Po's expression kept changing. He knew that what Tang 36 said was true, but how could he bear to give the mountain sea sword to Tang 36 for safekeeping? It would be better to give it to Chen Chongqing. "I won't give it to you, but I won't let others know either." Xian Yuanpa held the mountain sea sword and left the library. Not long after, he returned and the mountain sea sword was already gone. "Where did you hide it?" Chen Chongqing was really curious. Xian Yuanpa did not hide it from them and said, "In the firewood pile in the kitchen." Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, "Not bad. Even if others see it, they'll probably think it's a fire stick." After all, Tang 36 was not a child of a normal family. The Wenshui sword by his side was not inferior to the famous swords of the sword pool. Now that he realized that he could not get his hands on the mountain sea sword, the only thing he was interested in, he lost interest. Listening to the conversation between Xian Yuanpo and Chen Chongqing, he suddenly thought of a very interesting possibility. Say, in the future, a few thousand years later, will someone discover the secret of this iron sword in the firewood pile of the Tradition Academy and comprehend the way of the sword and become a peerless expert? Xian Yuanpo thought to himself, "I haven't become a peerless expert yet. Moreover, after I return to my tribe, will I still leave this sword in the Tradition Academy?" Chen Chongqing thought to himself, "This is indeed very interesting. It's very similar to some stories in book. The problem is, after a few thousand years, people like us will no longer exist. How will we know what will happen next?" The more Tang 36 thought about it, the more interesting he felt. His eyes became unusually bright. One sword isn't interesting enough. We have to hide a few more swords in the Tradition Academy. No, dozens or even hundreds of swords. Hide a few in the rocks beside the lake, a few in the tree holes, a few at the bottom of the lake, a few in the pillars of the library. Oh, right, isn't there a big bird's nest on top of the big banyan tree? TSK, say, the future students of the Tradition Academy will discover a peerless famous sword in a place every few decades. That scene. The more he talked, the more excited he got. Chen Chongqing, on the other hand, felt more helpless. He thought to himself, "Forget about the fish in the lake. How did the birds in the tree offend you?" Tang 36 did what he said. He walked towards the sword mountain and prepared to pick some old swords that were too damaged and hide them in the Tradition Academy. He even thought about the location of those hidden swords. He wouldn't tell anyone, not even Chen Chongqing. This way, it would be more interesting to find them in the future. At this moment, Zheshio's voice rang out. His voice was a little weak, but also a little mocking. "Didn't you say I should pick a sword? Why do I feel like this matter has nothing to do with me?" Chen Chongqing and the other two finally realized that Zheshio had not said a single word from start to finish. To be more precise, the three of them had been so engrossed in their conversation that they had long since forgotten about the main character. The atmosphere was a bit awkward, and Tang 36 sighed again. Something like a sense of existence is truly very mystical. You're clearly the most savage of us, but now you're in such a miserable state, and yet. Chen Chongqing saw Zheshio's expression and hurriedly stopped Tang 36 from continuing. He cautiously asked, "Which sword do you want?" Zheshio raised his arm and pointed at a certain place in the Sword Mountain. Because his injuries were too severe, his movements were rather difficult and slow, but they were very firm. Chen Chongqing and the other two followed his finger and looked over. Their expressions subtly changed. "You're sure you want this one?" "Yes." "But the origin of that sword in the future, it might provoke some discussion. Since Zhou Tong says that I'm a demon spy, then I naturally want to use a demon sword." The sword that Zheshio wanted was already old and slightly damaged, but its surface was still suffused with an extremely profound demonic qi and the smell of blood. It was the demon commander's banner sword. This sort of scene and story is the greatest motivation for me to write Chronicles of Choosing Heaven. I like writing these things. Chapter 457. After dividing the spoils, after dividing the swords, Zheshio had no interest in chatting with them and closed his eyes once more. Chen Chongqing felt his pulse and confirmed that his wounds were improving. He was slightly relieved, but he felt that a new problem had appeared in his meridians. The rhythm of the tide rush of blood was much slower than before. Was this a sign that his true essence was running out? Chen Chongqing did not dare to think of this possibility. He dimmed the light of the oil lamp and returned the sword mountain to its sheath. He indicated for Tang 36 and Xianyuan Pe to follow him out of the library. "No problems?" Tang 36 asked. Chen Chongqing did not directly answer this question, but asked, "Just what kind of person is Zhou Tong?" Today, after leaving the department for purging officials and seeing Zheshio's miserable state in the carriage, he had already made up his mind. However, he also remembered very clearly that when he stood in that quiet and secluded courtyard, the crabapple blossoms falling like snow, Zhou Tong's red official's gown gave them a terrifying mental pressure and feeling of terror. He really wanted to know how long he would have to wait before he could truly face this kind of terror. Zhou Tong lied. He doesn't have an older sister. In the afternoon, the Wenshui Tangs sent over the relevant information. Tang 36 said, he and the Empress did not meet in front of some princely estate, but in the 100 Herb Garden. At the time, he was probably still at the meditation realm, but his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds and he quickly succeeded in star condensation. It's said that this was because he received the Empress's decree to raid the estates of those princes and secretly took many treasures. Does the Divine Empress not care about these things? Chen Chongqing naturally did not think that the Divine Empress did not know about these things, so he used the word, not care. Tang 36 shook his head and said, Zhou Tong's strongest technique is called the Great Crimson Gown. It's a technique that leans towards the mind. It's said that it can forcefully enter a cultivator's sea of consciousness. Chen Chongqing and Xianyuan Pe thought of the sea of blood they saw in the courtyard today, and felt a chill run down their bodies. Tang 36 continued, if the Great Crimson Gown moves, Zhou Tong can very easily crush our seas of consciousness. Of course, he won't do this, but if you want to take revenge for Zheshio right now, then you'll definitely get a taste of that. This was a reminder and a warning. Chen Chongqing was somewhat confused. Since he doesn't dare to kill us, why did he use the Great Crimson Gown in the courtyard today? Just to establish dominance? Zhou Tong is a ruthless and sinister person, but his schemes are outstanding. Logically speaking, he wouldn't do such a meaningless thing. Tang 36 also couldn't figure it out. He raised his sword-like eyebrows and said, at that time I felt that he wanted to use that sea of blood to shock our Dao hearts, and then see something. What does he want to see? Xianyuan Pe said from the side. In any case, I'm not afraid, I don't have any secrets. Chen Chongqing was silent, because he had many secrets. In reality, when he came to the capital from Xining village, he only had secrets related to his body, but as time passed, he had more and more secret. For example, the heavenly tome monoliths in the garden of Zhou. For example, the black nightmare coffin in the tomb of Zhou. For example, the having blade style on the coffin. For example, the garden of Zhou might not have been destroyed. The path to the garden of Zhou was currently in his sheath. Returning to the small building, he took a bath and calmed his mind. He went to the window and glanced at the sea of stars in the night sky. He sat cross-legged on the floor, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. He prepared to carry out his nightly homework, to draw in starlight for purification, and then once more attempt to use the image of the black monolith to find the path through the garden of Zhou. However, perhaps because he was used to cultivating in the library, or perhaps because the mental shock he had received in Zhou prison today was too great, he was unexpectedly unable to enter a meditative state. In the next moment, an extremely faint and serene fragrance wafted into his nose. Only then did he understand that the reason he was unable to meditate was not because of these reasons, but because someone had come. Mou floated out of the Orthodox Academy's forest, directly to the window, and then floated in. Under the starlight, her beauty seemed untainted by the mundane world. She seemed especially familiar with the entire process, as if she had practiced it countless times. However, she had not expected that tonight, Chen Chongqing would be sitting cross-legged on the floor behind the window. As a result, when she floated into the small building and crouched down, she just happened to crouch in front of Chen Chongqing. The distance between the two was very close, their noses almost touching, their eyes staring at each other. The scene was rather awkward. Fortunately, Mou's chi was like an orchid and Chen Chongqing was as clean as the sky after the rain, so the two did not feel too angry. The night breeze blew by, lifting a strand of black hair and landing on Chen Chongqing's face. It was somewhat ticklish, causing him to frown. Mou flew onto the bed, her movements truly seeming especially familiar, as if she had done it countless times. Chen Chongqing knew of her eccentricity, but even now, he still could not understand it, much less accept it. "You're not planning on sleeping on my bed again, are you?" he asked. "Can't I? In any case, you won't be on this bed at this time." Mou seemed especially confident, but in the light of the starlight, one could faintly see that her face was a little red. Chen Chongqing somewhat helplessly said, "But I'm here at this time, so why did you also come?" Mou replied, "You're usually cultivating in the library at this time. Who knows what's wrong with your head today, to come back so early?" Chen Chongqing felt very innocent, thinking to himself, "It's my fault." Then he thought of Luoluo. He thought about how he and Luoluo rarely had the chance to meet recently, let alone speak. For some reason, he felt rather gloomy. Mou looked at his expression and asked, "What's wrong?" "Zheshio's injuries are too severe, so he's resting in the library. I was afraid of disturbing him, so I came back early." Mou looked at him and suddenly creased her brow. "I originally thought that you should be very angry right now." In truth, she and Chen Chongqing had only met a few times, so they couldn't be considered familiar. Before Chen Chongqing had left the mausoleum of books, the difference in status between the two had been too great. But for some reason, from the moment they met in the imperial palace, she realized that Chen Chongqing was someone who could very easily provoke her anger. Anger was actually a kind of emotion, so this meant that Chen Chongqing could very easily affect her emotions. This was something that she could not understand. She also could not understand how Chen Chongqing, at the age of 16, could control his emotions so well. Chen Chongqing did not answer her question. Today's encounter in Zhou prison, mainly Zheshio's miserable state, would naturally cause problems with his emotions. It was just that when he was young, he had learned a very simple principle from Senior Yu Ren. Later on, in Xuanyang City, he had comprehended this principle even more clearly. There were some things that one just needed to silently remember in one's heart. There was no need to show it, only need to do it. Impulsiveness and passion were never synonymous, and calmness did not mean cowardice. Even if everyone thought he was a coward, he would not care, let alone the fact that the person speaking was Mou. He and Mou were not friends, so he was keenly aware of how terrifying this famed beauty of the great Zhou dynasty was, especially after today. The entire continent knew that Mou and Zhou Tong were the two people the Divine Empress relied on the most. Zhou Tong was so terrifying, so just how lacking could she be? Shouldn't you say, long time no see? Mou said. Carefully thinking about it, after the conclusion of the grand examination, they had not met. But Chen Chongqing did not feel the need to say these words, because he had never wanted to meet her in the first place. It was just that she would always appear in front of him. Chen Chongqing did not respond to her 3 consecutive questions, causing Mou's mood to become rather terrible. Her eyes slightly narrowed, sharp, like the willow leaves outside the palace walls, very beautiful. You have a very hostile attitude towards me, she said. Chen Chongqing replied, you should be well aware of the current situation in the capital. Mou laughed, then said with a hint of derision, do you really think that you have the qualifications to be viewed as an enemy by the Empress? Chen Chongqing replied, even if I had the qualifications, I still wouldn't want to become the Empress's enemy. But it's very obvious that the people on your side do not think this way. He was naturally referring to the new rules of the all-school martial exhibition, the suppression of the Orthodox Academy by the Tianhai clan and the new faction of the Orthodoxy. Mou's smile faded. What other people think has nothing to do with what you do. Chen Chongqing replied, I came to the capital only to cultivate and study. I never thought that I would participate in these major events, but do you think that I can avoid them? Mou's voice was slightly cold. Why can't you avoid them? Just because you are the only successor of the Orthodoxy's Orthodox school? Of course, this was a very sufficient reason, because people could not deny their school's background and their past. That would be equivalent to denying themselves. But this was definitely not the entire reason, because Chen Chongqing had previously cared more about cultivation speed, about defying the heavens and changing fate. Later on, he realized that he had no choice but to care about whether or not Luolua's meridians could be opened, whether or not Xianyuan Po's right arm could be cured, whether or not Zheshio's tide rush of blood could be cured, whether or not Tang 36 could have a name that satisfied him, and most importantly, whether or not the Orthodox Academy's gate could be preserved. He had not forgotten the words that Archbishop Mei Li Sha had said to him before his death. Besides pursuing what one wanted and what one had to obtain, wasn't the so-called process of growth just to shoulder one responsibility after another? Mou stood up and looked down at him. With an indifferent expression, she said, the Empress cannot be defeated. At this moment, she had returned to the powerful personage that could normally make all the officials keep quiet out of fear. Chen Chongqing's attitude towards her did not change in the slightest. He thought of the storm that filled Xuanyang City, thought of the very calm words that Wang Pe had said after Zhu Luo and Guan Xinca had simultaneously appeared, and said, I want to try. It was naturally impossible for him to defeat the Divine Empress. He didn't even need to try. He just wanted to try, wanted to see if he and the Orthodox Academy could withstand this raging tide. Mou suddenly lost interest in talking and walked out of the house. Of course, she still habitually treated the window as the front door. As she walked past him, Chen Chongqing suddenly thought of a possibility. Somewhat uncertainly, he asked, could it be that when I was in the Mausoleum of Books and the Garden of Zhou, you were always sleeping on my bed? Mou was somewhat humiliated and angry. She yelled, so what? Chen Chongqing felt very helpless. There was nothing he could do about this matter. It must be known that although he was young, he was still a man. He could not reason with anyone about this matter, and he could not beat her. Then, he hesitated for a while, then finally said, in the future, remember to frequently bathe. It's best, every time you bathe you come back. As soon as these words left his mouth, he knew that they were inappropriate, because they sounded very ambiguous. Just as expected, Mou's elegant eyebrows shot up, her beautiful face brimming with killing intent. She coldly said, "Do you want to die?" Chen Chongqing knew that he truly should not have done so. He repeatedly said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Mou's expression softened a little. "If an apology is useful, then you won't kill Zhou Tong in the future?" Chen Chongqing very seriously replied, "Of course not." Mou said, "That's why they say that words are never as sincere as gifts." Chen Chongqing was stunned. He thought to himself, with your status in the great Zhou dynasty, besides a fellow like Tang 36, who would dare say that they're richer than you? What can I give you? I hear that you have a maiden sword? Mou sweetly smiled at him. Don't you think this is a coincidence? When I was little, the Empress just happened to teach me this sword style. Chapter 458. In the Zhou dynasty, if Mou asked someone for something, let alone a sword, even if it was her entire family fortune, there would still be countless people who would willingly give it to her with both hands. They would even feel that it was a great honor. Although Chen Chongqing's current status was not normal, if he could use his previous slip of the tongue to turn this secret connection between the two into a friendship, no matter how he looked at it, it would be a good thing. This was pushing the boat with the current. It was very easy, very natural, and no one would refuse. Chen Chongqing didn't refuse, but he also didn't immediately agree. He thought very seriously, then looked into Mou's eyes and asked, "Why?" Mou was stunned. She didn't think that she would get such an answer when it was so rare for her to ask someone for something. Of course, she wouldn't answer Chen Chongqing's question. She sneered, turned around, and disappeared into the forest outside the window. Chen Chongqing looked at the faintly discernible figure in the dark forest. He didn't understand why her mood suddenly became bad. He had previously thought about it and confirmed that the maiden sword was indeed not on the list, but that was his own thing. Even if she wanted it from him, couldn't he at least ask for a reason? To put it more bluntly, it was his thing that he didn't want to give to her. Was it not okay? The people in Xining village were so simple, Senior Yuren was so simple, why were the people in the capital so confusing? He didn't think about these things that were countless times more complicated than the scriptures of the way. He closed his eyes and continued meditating. Perhaps it was because Mou left in a hurry and didn't have time to leave too much of her body fragrance in the room, but this time he meditated very quickly. He quickly sensed his own destined star and began to absorb starlight for purification. At the same time, he produced an extremely thin strand of divine sense from his sea of consciousness and entered the sheath of the sword. With some difficulty, but with familiarity, he passed through the sea of sharp sword essences. Once again, he arrived at the other shore and saw the shadow of the black stone tablet. After trying hard for the past few days, his divine sense would no longer be destroyed when it touched the black stone tablet. He could even go deeper into it. Especially tonight, his divine sense was completely immersed in the shadow of the black stone tablet. He could even vaguely see a cliff. The cliff was very dilapidated, but he could barely make out that the top of the cliff should have been smooth and hard grayish-white rock. However, there were now countless cracks on it, and the green trees were all destroyed. Only a few pine trees with their roots deep into the cracks of the cliff were hanging on crookedly. In the distance of the cliff, he could see many mirror-like lakes, which made him feel even more familiar. Was it Sunset Valley? Those small lakes were the wetlands at the edge of the plains of the unsetting sun. Was that where he had escaped from the bottom of the lake on the other side of the mountain? Then was this really the current garden of Zhou? Was she still inside? At this moment, his spiritual sense had already penetrated far too deeply into the black monolith. It was crushed by the extremely powerful energy. Let alone searching the garden of Zhou, even if he wanted to persist for a moment, he would not be able to do so. He only gazed from afar and thought for a moment, then turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared without a trace. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes and woke up. It was already late at night. The sky outside the window was filled with stars. Under the starry sky, the forest of the Orthodox Academy seemed very much like verdant branches of grass. Just like those weeds in the plains of the unsetting sun that were even taller than a man. Chen Chongqing very naturally thought of those days when he traveled with her in the plains. He thought of the life and death they had together in the snowy temple. He thought of the mixing of blood and water in the mausoleum of Zhou. He thought of that conversation at the end of the divine path. If Nank had not used the soul pivot to control the newborn golden-winged Great Pung, and commanded the monster tide to surround the mausoleum of Zhou, perhaps the two of them would have already begun confiding in each other? Was that the word? He was not very sure. It was an unfamiliar emotion that he had never encountered before. It was a sweet and intimate emotion, yet it made one somewhat afraid, uneasy, yet it made one yearn for it. Most importantly, the sorrow and joy this emotion brought was actually so intense that at times, it was even more important than everything else. He had studied the Taoist canon since he was a child. When he was 10, he knew that he did not have long to live, so he strictly controlled his emotions, neither sad nor happy. However, whether it was when he carried her in the plains, when their shoulders touched in front of the stone gate at the end of the divine path, or when he thought of her now, he could not, nor did he want to, control these emotions. Because he liked the beauty of those times, he confirmed that he longed for them now. Then, just where are you? Su Yorong walked between the cliffs. Her face was like a painting, slightly childish, beautiful and moving, dignified and divine. Yes, this was a rhyme, because she had always been beautiful to the extreme. Other than a faintly discernible rhyme, it was very difficult to describe her with anything that actually existed. The night wind rustled her sleeves, her white clothes fluttering in the wind. She slowly walked, her footsteps exuding an imposing aura. However, if one looked carefully, one might discover that her watery eyes concealed a faint sorrow. A girl that was not even 16 years of age should be enjoying her youth, so why was she sad? Because Holy Maiden Peak had once again sent news that no one knew who the disciple of the Snow Mountain sect was. In the distant northwest, the Snow Mountain sect was not even willing to admit that it had a disciple called Su Sheng. Perhaps you infiltrated the Garden of Zhou, perhaps you were a disciple of the secret sect, or perhaps you had some secret, but none of that was important. Only, are you really called Su Sheng? Are you really going to die like this? After leaving the Garden of Zhou, because her injuries were too severe, she had always secluded herself behind Holy Maiden Peak to recuperate. She no longer admired the snow, listened to the rain, or gathered herbs every day. She only ate, read, and quietly pondered. She quietly pondered her experiences in the Garden of Zhou, the life and death in the plains, and that man. She had long ago resolved to dedicate her life to the great Tao in the book. How could she have imagined that she would truly experience the first throbbing of her life? And yet, that throbbing had so quickly vanished with the wind. It was an indescribable faint sorrow, a memory carved into her bones that she had no place to talk to. She was keenly aware that perhaps that memory would forever accompany her in her endless years of cultivation. Moreover, only she knew that it would ultimately become a corner of her spiritual world that no one else could touch. That was a world that she temporarily did not want to leave, so she naturally no longer cared about the matters of the outside world. Su Li, Liang Wangsun, Painted Armor Xiao Zhang, Wang Pe, Zhu Luo, Guan Xinka. That storm in Xuanyang City had alarmed the entire continent, but it was not enough to make her raise her drooping eyes. Only the names of her holy maiden teacher and Chen Chongqing could make her focus for a few moments. But there was a person that she had to care about, and she really did care about. Mountly was in internal strife, Xiao Songgong and the other 2 elders had rebelled, and Qiushanjun was heavily injured and on the verge of death. These news had long since spread throughout the south. When her injuries gradually healed, and she walked out of Holy Maiden Peak, she heard this news and knew that she had to go and take a look. Yes, she was walking on a cliff. At this moment, she was walking on Mount Li. There was another chapter in the night. Chapter 459. The entire world knew that Qiushanjun was deeply in love with Su Yorong, and people had once believed that Su Yorong was similarly deeply in love with Qiushanjun. The true dragon and the heavenly phoenix were of the same origin and grew up together. One was highly likely to continue the longevity sex, several decades-old legacy of the saints, while the other was the future holy maiden of the south. No matter how one looked at it, they were a match made in heaven. Until last year's Ivy Festival in the capital. At that Ivy Festival, Chen Chongqing took out the marriage contract. It was also at that Ivy Festival that Su Yorong had the White Crane deliver a letter. In that letter, she clearly expressed that everything was not as people thought. Only at this moment did the entire world understand that the so-called match made in heaven and earth, that it was only right and proper, was only the beautiful imagination and hope in people's hearts. If it were a normal girl, Su Yorong would probably not be willing to meet with Qiushanjun because of the awkwardness and inconvenience. If it were those exceptionally intelligent and decisive girls, they would also not meet with Qiushanjun, because it seemed like only by meeting with him could he quickly calm down. But Su Yorong did not do this. She was not that youth like the cool breeze. Her Dao heart was also untainted. She did not calculate, nor would she deliberately change. Walking into the dwelling at the peak of Mount Li, she placed the empty lunchbox on the table and said to Qiushanjun on the bed, "Junior sister Qijian is still very weak, but she always thinks about going to the capital to find Jishyo." Qiushanjun leaned against the headboard, his pale face brimming with worry. When Marshal Granduncle returned to the mountain and learned of this matter, he was very unhappy and scolded junior sister for a very long time. Su Yorong was somewhat confused. Senior Su Li is free and unrestrained, so why is he so unreasonable in this matter? Qiushanjun smiled. When any man becomes a father, he will always become the father-in-law that he hated the most when he was young. Su Yorong said, but I still don't understand why he would so sternly oppose. Qiushanjun fell silent for a while, then said, Marshal Granduncle saw that wolf cub on the snowy plains. He said that wolf cub was sick and could not live for long. This was the first time Su Yorong had heard of this matter. When she thought about that wolf youth that had once given her the greatest pressure on the proclamation of Azure Sky, and how not only did he have a miserable background, his fate was also so unbearable, she couldn't help but feel somewhat sorrowful. Qiushanjun looked at her and said, no father would agree to his daughter marrying a short-lived man. Speaking of which, Marshal Uncle even scolded Chen Chongqing for 3 days because of this. Su Yorong smiled but didn't say anything. Only after coming to Mount Li did she learn a few things that had happened after the Garden of Zhou, such as the story of Chen Chongqing accompanying Su Li across the snowy plains to cross the Tianliang Mountains. It had to be admitted that these things had somewhat changed her impression of that fellow called Chen Chongqing, but that fellow was still called Chen Chongqing. She would not speak ill of him, nor did she want to praise him. Qiushanjun didn't say anything else. With the help of the luminous pearl on the stone wall, he continued to read the sword manual in his hand. Su Yorong picked up a scroll of longevity scripture from the table and started to read it silently. The cave was very quiet, but it wasn't warm, just very natural. Just like when Su Yorong walked in, the two of them started to talk, and then ended the conversation. There was no need to deliberately do anything. Several years ago, when Su Yorong was still a little girl, she came from the capital to Holy Maiden Peak and began to cultivate, study, and comprehend the heavenly tomes at South Stream Temple. The two of them would often meet, often sitting across from each other like this, quietly reading, not speaking. The common people all believed that these two were childhood sweethearts without guessing, but in reality, they were well aware that this was not correct. The reason they did not guess was because they both clearly understood what the other was thinking. After some time, Su Yorong stood up and said, "Senior, I'll be leaving first. I'll come see you tomorrow." Qiushan Jun moved his gaze away from the book and looked at her. However, he did not act like he did a few nights ago, like he did a few years ago, and tell her to be careful on the road. These were the most joyful and tranquil nights he had experienced in the last several years. Because he could calmly look at her, whether it was the faintly blinking eyelashes, the fingers flipping through the pages of the book, or the lines at the corners of her lips. He didn't need to look at her from time to time. Just when he was tired from reading, he could casually raise his head and see her sitting there. This made him feel at ease, calm, and then happy. He really wanted these kinds of nights to be more, so he wanted to say a few more words. Because of martial uncle's matter, the Li Shan sword sect owes him a huge favor. No matter what grudges we had in the past, now it is us who owes him. Qiushan Jun looked at her and said, "But this kind of thing has nothing to do with favors. What I want to say is, he is very excellent and deserves you. He is definitely not as naughty as you said when you were young, and he is definitely not as unbearable as you mentioned in your letter last year. So now, what do you think about this marriage?" The person mentioned in this paragraph was obviously Chen Chongqing. Qiushan Jun's tone was very calm, very open, and very sincere. Su Yorong thought for a while and said, "After a while, I will return to the capital to cancel the marriage." "Cancel the marriage?" Qiushan Jun said seriously. "For Chen Chongqing, it is a bit unfair. Gossip is a fearful thing. What your family did in the capital last year was already close to humiliation." Su Yorong looked at his eyes and said calmly, "But if you fulfill the marriage, it is unfair to me." The marriage with Chen Chongqing was decided by her grandfather. No one had ever asked for her opinion. After a moment of silence, Qiushan Jun said, "I'm sorry." The sorry here was referring to the matter of the Southern diplomatic mission going to the capital last year to propose. At the time, no one had asked for Su Yorong's opinion. Su Yorong smiled and said nothing. She understood Qiushan Jun's character and believed that the matter had nothing to do with him. At the time, she had been sent by the elders of her sect to the Southern Sea to quietly cultivate. Qiushan Jun was fighting with those young demon experts over the key to the Garden of Zhou. When she thought of the Garden of Zhou, a faint sorrow suddenly appeared in her eyes that were like the waters of autumn. In the mausoleum of Zhou, he had said that he had an engagement, but he would cancel it. She had also said to him that she had an engagement, but she would definitely not marry that person. Why did they have this conversation? Naturally, it was because he wanted to marry her and she also wanted to marry him. Although they did not say it, although he was already dead, how could she deny it? How could she forget it? Yes, so she wanted to return to the capital to cancel the marriage. Whether Chen Chongqing was good or bad, it was not important because he could not be him. "Junior sister, what's wrong?" Qiushan Jun could sense the slightest change in her mind, because in these past few years, his thoughts had always been on her. He could sense her sadness and could not help but be somewhat worried. "It's nothing." Su Yorong looked into Qiushan Jun's eyes and suddenly felt that she should not hide this matter from him. After a slight pause, she said, "Senior, there's something you don't know. The reason I insisted on canceling the engagement is because I already have someone I like." The cave suddenly became extremely quiet, even quieter than when the two of them were reading. Qiushan Jun suddenly smiled and said, "Presumably, that person definitely isn't me." Su Yorong smiled, then roughly explained what she had encountered in the Garden of Zhou. She mainly talked about that Snow Mountain sect secret sect disciple called Su Xing. Qiushan Jun's smile disappeared. After a long period of silence, he said, "Junior sister, he should already be dead." Su Yorong calmly replied, "I know." Qiushan Jun looked at her, somewhat worried. Walking out of the cave and arriving at the edge of the cliff, the pine trees rustled in the night wind. Under the starlight, they seemed like a silver sea. Su Yorong turned to the scholarly young man at the edge of the cliff and said, "Second brother." Go Hanshi had left the mausoleum of books early precisely because he knew of the news from Mount Li, so he had arrived earlier than her. He turned to Su Yorong, wanting to say something, but in the end, he could only sigh. To him, Su Yorong was his junior sister and Qiushan Jun was his eldest brother. He understood the matters between the two of them the best, and he also understood many matters in the capital. Below the rustling pine trees was an extremely precipitous cliff. Suddenly, a mournful howl came from the cliff. Xiao Songgong and the two Discipline Hall elders were currently imprisoned in the cliff of Mount Li. The two Discipline Hall elders had not yet recovered from their heavy injuries, while Xiao Songgong's fate was even more miserable. Su Li had directly ordered his 2 arms to be chopped off. As for that longevity sect elder, who wanted to take advantage of Su Li's absence to re-establish his authority, he had his cultivation crippled by Su Li. The junior martial uncle of Mount Li's conduct was truly cold-blooded and ruthless. Su Li was currently recuperating in the back of the mountain. Su Yorong also wanted to go there because her teacher, the Holy Maiden of the South, was also there. After the storm in Xuanyang City, all of Mount Li, all of the South, all of the continent, finally knew that the Holy Maiden and Su Li actually had such a deep friendship. Even Su Yorong had only heard of this matter for the first time. Let's not talk about other matters, but if you insist on returning to the capital to break off the engagement, I hope that you can do your utmost to take care of Chen Chongqing's face, Go Hanshi said to her. Su Yorong was a little surprised. After experiencing so many things, especially after Chen Chongqing and Su Li's grand return to the south, she already had many questions about the things Shuang'er and Mou had said in their letters. She was no longer as contemptuous of Chen Chongqing as she was in the past, but she still had not expected that Go Hanshi would take the initiative to speak up for Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing, just what sort of person is he? Upon hearing her question, Go Hanshi seriously pondered it for a very long time. Finally, he came to a conclusion. He is a real person. Neither he nor Su Yorong knew that on the return to the south, Su Li had once evaluated Chen Chongqing in this way. Is that so? Su Yorong was very confident in Go Hanshi's judgment of people. She couldn't help but be somewhat absent-minded. She had originally forgotten many of the matters of her childhood, but after Chen Chongqing entered the capital, she gradually began to remember a few things. But, forget it, perhaps there really was some misunderstanding, but it had nothing to do with her. She bid farewell to Go Hanshi and followed the path by the pine forest to the back of the mountain. Go Hanshi suddenly thought of something and said, "Junior sister, Chen Chongqing." Su Yorong turned to look at him. Go Hanshi originally wanted to tell her that Chen Chongqing had discovered the sword pool in the garden of Zhou and that the Li Palace was preparing to return these swords to the various sections. Among them was the temple sword that Holy Maiden Peak had lost, but seeing her rather desolate expression, he knew that she did not want to hear it. He also thought that she probably already knew of this matter, so he shook his head and said, "It's nothing." Chapter 460. Chen Chongqing had found the sword pool and taken out many swords. This matter had not yet been spread, but it was no longer a secret. It was just that Su Yorong had been in seclusion this entire time to recuperate and did not know of this matter, but everyone believed that she naturally knew of this matter. If Go Hanshi had said it now, she would have guessed a few things ahead of time, but in reality, it was never important when she knew. These words were very difficult to pronounce, but the reasoning behind them was actually very simple. Just like in all stories or real life, people would always encounter problems of this sort. Some problems would make you drink poison and throw yourself into the grave, while other problems would make you not know whether to laugh or cry and lose your marriage. In the end, the ending of the story or life had little to do with the problems. What was important was how you resolved those problems. When Su Yorong reached the rear peak of Mount Li, her teacher was attempting to resolve a problem. As the leader of the southern sects that could stand on equal footing with the Pope, she naturally had to resolve a major problem. This problem was called the confluence of North and South. If the humans wanted to completely defeat the demons, or at least completely eliminate the threat of the demons, they needed a true unification, or in the words that had been popular for the past 200 years, the confluence of North and South. The great Zhou dynasty had never stopped thinking of truly conquering the South, but even the wise and mighty Emperor Taizong had only managed to get the sects and clans of the South to nominally acknowledge the legitimate status of the capital. After the Divine Empress took office, this was what she wanted to accomplish the most, but she had also not succeeded. 10 years ago, the Liang household and the Longevity sect had conspired in an attempt to conquer the South and the North. Although it seemed like a joke in hindsight, it also showed that the confluence of North and South was the inevitable trend of events. Several hundred years earlier, the confluence of North and South had failed for a very complicated reason. But in the last 200 years, the entire continent, including the demons, knew that the reason the Tianhai Divine Empress, the Pope, and the Holy Maiden of the South had not been able to advance the confluence of North and South even a single step was because of the existence of a single person. Because Su Li did not agree. Why was it that after Su Li's bloody battle with the demon experts on the snowy plains of the land of demons, he had to immediately face the shameless pursuit of the human world? Why was it that the saints and the storms of the 8 directions did not hesitate to damage their reputations in order to put him to death in Xuanyang City? Was it because he had killed too many people? Of course not, but because only with Su Li's death could the great cause of confluence of North and South truly be realized. I don't want you to become the second Zhou Dufu. The Holy Maiden looked at Su Li and softly said, "If you feel that the faces of the people of Zhou are truly shameless, then what the eyes don't see, the heart doesn't grieve." Su Li shook his head. "You still don't understand why I don't agree to this matter. When have you ever truly opened your heart to me?" The saintess looked into his eyes and smiled. Su Yorong knew that her teacher and Su Li knew of her arrival. It was just that the actions of the elders could be like the cool breeze and the numerous stars, but she could not continue to listen. She stepped forward to bow. Su Li pointed at her and said to the Holy Maiden, "If you have time, you should first solve your disciple's problem." Su Li's asked, she asked. Su Li continued, "Her problem is even more troublesome than the confluence of the North and South. Not even I know what to do." The saintess raised her eyebrows slightly and asked, "What problem?" Su Li replied, "Of course it's a question of the most important matters in life. Between Qiushan Jun and that idiot Chen Chongqing, even I can't tell who's better. Just who is she going to marry?" The saintess said with slight annoyance, "What nonsense are you spouting in front of me?" Su Yorong truly found it impossible to accept this sort of scene. She sighed in her heart, but she also felt that Senior Su Li's words had faintly made him feel a little closer to Chen Chongqing. "I won't marry anyone," she said. "After returning to the capital, I will break off the engagement." The tip of Su Li's eyebrows slightly perked up, like a sword that wanted to fly into the night mist of Mount Li, but in the end, he said nothing. The saintess looked at her with pity. Su Yorong had encountered something in the garden of Zhou, but no one had told it, not even her. But what kind of person was she? With a glance a few days ago, she knew that her female disciple had encountered a romantic obstacle, so she no longer brought up the matter of the engagement. Instead, she said, "When we go to the capital, go to the Li Palace in my place to pick something." Su Yorong said, "Yes, master, but I don't know what it is." The Holy Maiden said, "The sword pool of the Garden of Zhou has once again seen the light of day. Chen Chongqing is willing to return those swords to the various sections. The temple sword is among them, but it is temporarily kept in the Li Palace. The temple sword was the sword that the Holy Maiden of the South always carried with her. Many years ago, Zhou Dufu had stolen it from Holy Maiden Peak, and it had since disappeared without a trace. Hearing this news, Su Yorong was very shocked, and then she felt that something was not right. Yes, something was very wrong, Su Li suddenly asked. When are you going to the capital? Su Yorong returned to her senses and replied, it should be after the winter solstice. Su Li said, since you're going to the capital, help me return something to Chun Chongqing. It just so happens that you two know each other. Su Yorong subconsciously resisted, saying, I don't know him. Girl, when you get stubborn, you're no different from your master. Su Li said, Tianhai and your master only taught you, an old man only has him as a junior. You two will always have to fight. You can break off the engagement without seeing each other, but can you also not see each other when you fight? Su Yorong knew that this was indeed the case. After returning to the capital, she ignored the matters of the Ivy League gathering and the grand examination. Based on the current situation, her battle with Chun Chongqing was unavoidable. What thing? An umbrella. Su Li took out a yellow paper umbrella from somewhere and threw it to Su Yorong. This was the umbrella that he cherished the most in the past. Within it was the sword that he most wanted to find, and it also represented a period of time. So on the snowy plains, even when he was bickering with Chun Chongqing like a child, he could not bear to give it away. But now, he just casually threw the umbrella away. The Holy Maiden's expression changed slightly and her voice trembled. You really agree? Su Li replied, I'm still considering it, but if there really is a chance to go to other worlds and see, it really is better than smelling the stench in this swamp. The Holy Maiden said no more. She quietly gazed at him, her face filled with gratification and sentimentality. If Su Yorong saw this scene, she would definitely feel very helpless, but she did not. Because she was currently looking at the umbrella in her hand, that old umbrella. Of course she recognized this umbrella. She had held this umbrella before. She had raised this umbrella before. From the plains to the mausoleum of Zhou. The journey spanned more than 1,000 li, passing through several seasons. At the time, she was on his back, the umbrella in her hand. This umbrella had sheltered her and him from the rain and snow, shielded them from the wind and frost, avoided the dust, and guided them. Returning it to Chun Chongqing, the sword pool. The temple sword him. Her face instantly turned snow-white. She was somewhat absent-minded. She was very absent-minded. Just what was going on with all this? The next chapter will be out around 10:30. Chapter 461. Qiushan Jun's face was very pale, but it was different from the paleness caused by excessive blood loss and heavy injuries. It was more haggard, more downcast. In the span of half a night, he had experienced something that made him seem much older. Go Hanshi could see it clearly and knew why. His emotions were very complex, sympathy and then displeasure. The sympathy was for eldest brother, and the displeasure was for Su Yorong. He knew that this matter was not Su Yorong's fault, it was just that there was a difference of closeness and distance, and he could not understand why the matter had developed to this stage. Even though he had studied the Taoist canon since childhood, he still could not understand these matters. After some time, Qiushan Jun suddenly said, In a few days, junior sister will return to the capital. If you have nothing to do, accompany her. Go Hanshi was somewhat confused and asked, What's wrong? Qiushan Jun looked at the starlight outside the dwelling and said, Martial granduncle, might leave with the Holy Maiden. Where the South will go from here on out will depend on the movements in the capital. Go Hanshi was very shocked at these words. After a long time, he calmed down and asked, Why is junior sister returning to the capital? Does she really want to personally annul that engagement? Qiushan Jun shook his head. That matter is not important. On the contrary, I am mainly worried about her battle with Chun Chongqing. Go Hanshi was even more confused, thinking, Why does Marshal Granduncle, Master, and Senior all insist that junior sister Yu Rong will definitely battle with Chun Chongqing after returning to the capital? With the confluence of the North and South before us, neither the Divine Empress nor His Holiness is willing to raise too much of a storm at this time. In other words, the two saints will definitely maintain their silence. The struggle for the imperial throne is still below the surface. The Orthodoxy's new rules, the all-school martial exhibition, what the Tianhai clan and those two archbishops are doing is actually very similar to what the Pope and Archbishop Mei Li Sha are doing. It is to build momentum for the final battle. Qiushan Jun looked at him and calmly said, "From the Ivy Festival to the Grand Examination, and then to the Mausoleum of Books, Chun Chongqing walked on the starlight. First he defeated you, then he defeated fate. And this time, if he can continue to win, when his momentum and reputation are at their peak, junior sister Yu Rong will return to the capital from the south and defeat him in one fell swoop. In the future, who would dare lightly challenge the Divine Empress's dignity?" Then, he frowned slightly and said, "But this is too cruel." Go Hanshi understood what he meant by cruel. He shook his head and said, "What did junior sister say before?" Qiushan Jun very calmly recounted what Su Yorong had said before, such as how she had fallen in love with a disciple of the Snow Mountain sect who was possibly already dead. Go Hanshi thought that this was also a kind of cruelty. After a long period of silence he asked, "Could it be that this is it?" Qiushan Jun was silent for a long time, then said, "The dead cannot be defeated." Go Hanshi didn't know what to say, muttering, "This isn't right." "Who's wrong? Junior sister?" Qiushan Jun looked at him and said with a slight smile, "Why do you think Zhou Dufu's blade can't be blocked?" Go Hanshi answered, "Because it's fast." Qiushan Jun smiled and said, "Because sometimes, making a clean break, is truly merciful. The intellectual sword could sever the threads of love, and so could the saber." He said it with a smile and then coughed. He coughed painfully. It was so painful that he was a little sad. There were blood stains on his clothes. How could it be easily severed by swords and sabers? Love started without knowing where it started and ran deep. Chun Chongqing did not know that this storm in the capital was to build momentum. The so-called new rule would ultimately fall between him and Su Yorong. Similarly, the wariness and hostility of the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction, as well as those noble clans and sects in the distant south, towards the Orthodoxy's old faction and the Imperial clan, all fell on him and the Orthodox Academy. At 5 in the morning, he woke up punctually, calmed his mind, and opened his eyes. He got up, dressed, and washed his face. Rain fell outside the window, but the summer wind did not grow any colder. The sounds coming from the distant gate of the courtyard did not grow any quieter. He was already used to hearing all sorts of noise and news when he woke up. He was not as anxious as he was at first, very calmly doing what he was doing. He went to the kitchen across the lake to eat 2 bowls of millet porridge, 2 steamed buns made of sorghum flour, and 2 thin slices of Red River ham. He also took the chance to look for the mountain sea sword hidden in the pile of firewood, and only then did he return to the library. Yesterday, when he returned from Zhou prison, he realized that the pergolas on the street had not been torn down. He and Tang 36 had guessed that the so-called all-school martial exhibition could not possibly end with Zhou Ziheng's heavy injuries. Surpassing cultivation levels to defeat a star condensation cultivator was truly a matter that could shake the entire continent, but compared to the Tianhai clan's overwhelming power and arrogance, what did it count for? Especially since the Li Palace had maintained its silence. The Li Palace's silence did not mean that the Orthodoxy's old faction and the Pope truly did not care about the Orthodox Academy. From a few days ago until now, there had always been many Li Palace priests and Orthodoxy cavalry standing guard around the Orthodox Academy. Although they could not stop the noise, they ensured the area's safety. A Li Palace priest surnamed Lu hurried into the academy and stopped Chun Chongqing before he could enter the library. He first respectfully bowed, then offered a letter with both hands. The letter sent to the Orthodox Academy at this time was naturally a letter of challenge. Chen Chongqing returned the bow to Priest Lu, thanking him for the hard work he had put in these past few days, but he did not take the letter of challenge. He indicated that the priest should go to the small building to find Tang 36, and also told him to tell Tang 36 to wake up early to eat. It didn't matter if the millet porridge was cold, but if he woke up a little later, the entire basin of Red River ham would truly be eaten by Xian Yuanpo alone. Entering the library, he first examined Zheshio's condition, then took out the medicine that Luoluo had Guardian Jean deliver last night. He then untied his golden needle and dipped it into the green juice made from a medicinal herb that Tang 36 had stolen from the 100-herb garden last night. He then pierced it into the space between Zheshio's eyebrows and slowly twisted it, continuing to treat his injuries. After an unknown amount of time, the dual effects of the Li Palace's precious medicine and the 100-herb garden's medicinal juice, under the urging of the golden needle, completely entered Zheshio's meridians and then dispersed throughout his body. After finishing this, Chen Chongqing felt somewhat tired and his body was also somewhat hot, but he did not sweat like he did yesterday. Removing the poison in Zheshio's body was not a difficult matter, but what he had been most worried about was Nank's peacock plume poison. He did not know whether it was because a cardinal of the Li Palace had personally used the sacred light technique or because the poison in Zhou prison had clashed with it, but it had already become extremely weak, completely inconsistent with the amount of poison Zheshio had mentioned. Currently, he was most worried about the problem with Zheshio's meridians. The door to the library creaked and Xian Yuanpo walked in, asking, "What do I learn today?" The Orthodox Academy currently did not have an instructor, so if Xian Yuanpo wanted to learn something, he could only ask him. Chen Chongqing had experience in this aspect. He had taught students in the Orthodox Academy before, so he knew many demi-human cultivation methods and had a deep understanding of the demi-human's special body structure and meridians. Moreover, after the grand examination, he had treated Zheshio's illness many times, so he now had even more confidence in the demi-human cultivation methods. He took out a book that he had already prepared and handed it over, saying, "From today onwards, you will learn the Heavenly Thunder Bringer." The Heavenly Thunder Bringer was not a commonly seen cultivation method. To be precise, it was a scripture within the Orthodoxy's ancient records. It was said that when this scripture was cultivated to its peak, one could possess boundless strength, one's fist could call the wind, one's fist could call the rain, one could be like a demonic god, and could even call upon heavenly thunder to annihilate an incomparably powerful foe. But it was often said to be a legend. No one could understand how to cultivate this scripture, so naturally, no one had ever successfully cultivated it. Xian Yuanpo was a simple and honest Bear tribe youth, but that didn't mean he was stupid, especially after staying in the Orthodox Academy for so many days and being forced to read so many books by Chen Chongqing. His mind had long been opened and his knowledge had gradually broadened. Looking at the scripture in his hand, he said sadly, "Are you kidding me? Or do you think I will become a priest that calls for rain in the future?" Currently, the Heavenly Thunder Bringer most often appeared when praying for rain. The priests would lead the masses in reciting it, but who had ever seen the altar light up after reading this scripture, followed by the gathering of wind and clouds, thunder and lightning, followed by a torrential downpour? Even if this scripture was real, Xian Yuanpo was a youth that was willing to struggle his entire life to become a divine general of the demi-human race. Why would he be willing to become a Taoist priest that could call for wind and rain? Chen Chongqing didn't explain. He used his position as principal, his dignity as a grandmaster, and most importantly, Luoluo's request as well as the ownership of the Mountain Sea Sword to successfully suppress the first possible case of truancy since the reopening of the Orthodox Academy. Xian Yuanpo panted heavily. He angrily and unwillingly walked to the window, facing the sunlight and began to cultivate. Although the area outside the Orthodox Academy's gate gradually grew quiet, it didn't mean that the situation had calmed down. The all-school martial exhibition was a simple term, but it involved the Orthodoxy's training of cultivators and, more importantly, the war between humans and demons, so it obviously had a set of rules and regulations. Chen Chongqing didn't care about these things. After confirming that Zhixiu had fallen asleep again and that Xian Yuanpa had truly begun to earnestly read the scripture, he also began to meditate and cultivate. Last night, in the illusion of the black monolith, he had caught a glimpse of the scenes in the garden of Zhou. This allowed him to see hope, which made him even more anxious. As for the matters outside the academy gate, naturally, Tang 36 would be responsible for handling them. Chen Chongqing and Xian Yuanpa didn't have this ability, and even if Zhixiu wasn't injured, he only knew how to fight and kill. As a result, Chen Chongqing and Xian Yuanpa had always been waiting for Tang 36 to come out of the mausoleum of books, and Tang 36 had lived up to their expectations. On the first day of his return, he had sent Tianhaier flying with a kick and cursed Zhou Ziheng silly. What would he do today? Tang 36 was chewing on a small portion of a steamed bun made of sorghum flour. Within the steamed bun was the last piece of Red River ham that he could find in the kitchen. He took the letter of challenge from the Li Palace priest surnamed Lu, and without even looking at it, he directly walked out of the academy gate. Two groups of Orthodoxy cavalry stood in the drizzling rain, surrounded by a dense crowd. When they saw that the gate of the Orthodox Academy had been pushed open, the crowd exploded into a loud clamor. He was given a fright, and the steamed bun in his mouth almost fell into the rainwater. He mumbled, "What's going on? Qiushan Jun is good, Tang 36 is good." Chapter 462. Priest Lu of the Li Palace said somewhat helplessly, "We're all here to watch the show, so we can't go too far." Under the awning on the street, other than the stewards of the 4 workshops, there were no other important figures. Many of the Jingdo people who had come to watch the excitement had already arrived. It was only 6 o'clock in the morning and it was still raining. Tang 36 felt helpless and annoyed at the same time. He thought to himself, "Isn't it just a fight? What's there to watch? Is it worth waking up so early?" The crowd gradually separated and then quieted down. A middle-aged man wearing a black robe walked into the field expressionlessly. Tang 36 tore open the envelope and glanced at it. He confirmed that this was the challenger for today. It was a teacher from Li Palace College. His sword-like eyebrows furrowed slightly, not because his opponent was an expert at the peak of the ethereal opening realm, but because the confusion in his heart was growing stronger and stronger, and the feeling in his heart was growing stranger and stranger. Other than Star Caesar Academy, the other 5 ivies were directly under the jurisdiction of the Orthodoxy. Could it be that the Orthodoxy really had so many people that dared to defy the will of the Pope? The door of the library was pushed open, and the wind brought in raindrops. At the same time, Tang 36 walked in. "I don't understand this," he said to Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing shook his head and said, "In the current orthodoxy, including many priests in the Li Palace, they all experienced the chaos of the Orthodox Academy back then. They killed many experts consecrated by the imperial family, and many of them still have the blood of the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy on their hands. They obviously can't accept the imperial family returning to power and the Orthodox Academy reappearing. This has nothing to do with going against the will of His Holiness the Pope." After a short pause, he continued, "His Excellency the Bishop was right. His Holiness the Pope changed his mind too quickly. Even those loyal to him could not change his mind in a short time." Tang 36 thought about it and said, "That makes sense, but I still feel that something is wrong." Chen Chongqing was more concerned with the specifics and asked, "How good is the instructor from Li Palace College?" Tang 36 replied, "He's not at the star condensation realm, but at the peak of ethereal opening. He's very old, and it's obvious that he has some trump cards up his sleeve. Hearing this, Chen Chongqing was silent. He thought to himself, this kind of opponent doesn't seem to be as good as Zhou Ziheng, but his battle experience is probably far above Zhou Ziheng's. He won't be easy to deal with. He asked, when is the appointment with the other party? Tang 36 was startled and asked, what do you mean, when? Chen Chongqing was also slightly startled and said, when are you going to fight with that instructor from Li Palace College? Tang 36 finally understood what he meant and said casually, it's already over. Chen Chongqing didn't really hear it and asked, finished? Yes, it's over. Chen Chongqing didn't expect this at all and didn't know what to say for a moment. Xian Yuanpo was no longer able to focus on his studies and looked over in shock. Even the ears of Zhixiu, who was lying on the ground, slightly twitched. Who did it? The answer was obvious, but Chen Chongqing still wasn't sure. Tang 36 felt that he was an idiot to a certain extent and said, of course it's me. Xian Yuanpo was even more naive. He really thought that Her Highness Luoluo had returned. Hearing him admit it, he subconsciously asked, can you beat her? Since the instructor of the Li Palace College was at the peak of ethereal opening, how could Tang 36, who had just entered the upper level of ethereal opening in the Mausoleum of Books, be his opponent? What do you mean? Chen Chongqing can defeat a star condensation cultivator, but I can't even defeat an old man? Tang 36 sneered and said, look at my elegant, handsome, and unaffected appearance. You should know who won. It was quiet in the library. Chen Chongqing didn't know what to say. In the Ivy Festival and the Great Trial, Tang 36 was obviously weaker than Qi Jian and Guan Fei Bai, not to mention Go Han Shi. As a talented disciple of a noble family, he was suppressed by the poor disciples of the Li Mountain Sword sect to the point that he couldn't even lift his head. Chen Chongqing knew that he didn't show it on the surface. He was still careless, rich, willful, and full of vulgarities, but in reality, he was very irritated. Therefore, Tang 36 worked very hard in the Mausoleum of Books and finally caught up to and even surpassed Guan Fei Bai. Shockingly, he directly entered the upper level of ethereal opening. But Chen Chongqing still didn't expect that he would improve so much that he could beat a senior at the peak of ethereal opening. He looked at Tang 36 and confirmed that he really wasn't injured. He asked, what happened in the end? Tang 36 sat on the floor with his legs crossed. His clothes were slightly wet and there were some water droplets in his hair. He didn't answer Chen Chongqing's question immediately. He stayed silent for a while and then said, I cut off one of his hands. Chen Chongqing also stayed silent for a while and said, that's a bit heavy. Tang 36 said, you have to make them pay some price. Or else you will get challenge letters every day. What can you do? Can you keep fighting? If you make a mistake one time, they will dare to cut off your hand. He said this very calmly and firmly, because he knew that it was something that was bound to happen. Chen Chongqing noticed that his face was a bit pale. Then he remembered that although Tang 36 shouted that he would destroy Tian Haiye after he entered the capital, in reality, he grew up in Wenshui with a golden spoon in his mouth. After he came to the capital, he also had Principal Zhuang's care. Until he left the Heavenly Academy and came to the Tradition Academy, he began to face the trials of life. He never destroyed anyone. Besides the battles in the Grand Examination, he never saw blood. Chen Chongqing didn't say anything. He took out a handkerchief and handed it over. He said, wipe it. Tang 36 was a bit surprised. Xian Yuanpo was very surprised. Even Zhixiu opened his eyes. They were the closest people to Chen Chongqing in the world. Now they all knew that Chen Chongqing had a very serious and rarely showed obsession with cleanliness. It can only be rainwater. Chen Chongqing explained with a heavy tone, if you want to wipe off the blood on your sword, then you don't need to return the handkerchief to me. Tang 36's attack was very heavy, but the summer rain was even heavier. The light rain in the morning suddenly turned into a storm in the evening. The bloodstains in front of the Tradition Academy's gate were quickly washed away. Other than making the girls of the capital feel that he was even cooler and even more infatuated with him, this incident didn't seem to have any effect on the Tradition Academy or the Tradition Academy's opponents. On the morning of the second day, the Tradition Academy once again received 3 letters of challenge. But unlike yesterday, the gate of the Tradition Academy never opened. Only the sound of argument and even quarreling could be faintly heard. It wasn't until the evening that the gate was opened again. Seeing Tang 36 walk out of the gate, the idlers of the capital, the stewards under the awning, and the people in the carriages on the street all became spirited. It was indeed different from yesterday. Today there was no rain, only a sky full of sunset. The one-shui sword left its sheath. The bright body of the sword reflected the sunset. At the same time, it seemed to have some kind of magic power that absorbed all the sunset in the west of the capital. The street was dark and then bright again. Tang 36's first move was the most powerful 3 moves of Wen Shui. The evening clouds disappeared and the sword spirit rose. The ground in front of the gate was left with some rainwater. The puddles were like a lake that had shrunk countless times. His true essence surged and his sword energy surged. The surface of the lake glowed with a golden light and the heat instantly disappeared. The alley resounded with the shrill howls of countless swords. The swordsman that seemed to come from the temple seminary but was actually an expert of the Tianhai clan flew backwards and landed heavily on the street. With a bang, those small lakes were smashed by the figure and the golden light turned into countless broken scales. The swordsman's body was crisscrossed with more than 10 wounds. Blood flowed everywhere and he could no longer stand. Tang 36 didn't give him another glance. Gripping the one shui sword, he looked at the crowd and said, "Next." The crowd was silent and then with a boom, they exploded. Especially those girls of the capital, they were even more infatuated. They shouted his name with all their might and threw the flowers in their hands at him. Flowers were constantly thrown at the gate of the Tradition Academy. Not long after, a thick layer of flowers had accumulated on the ground, like a sea of flowers. He stood in the center of this sea of flowers. Today there will be the second chapter. The time is uncertain. Chapter 463. One day this summer, Tang 36 broke the hand of the teacher of Li Palace College. The second day, he severely wounded the master of the Tianhai family with 1 strike. Then, he won 2 more matches. The third day, he won 2 matches in a row. The fourth day, he won 1 match easily. The fifth day, he won 4 matches in a row. So far, he represented the Tradition Academy in 12 matches without losing a single match. The area in front of the Orthodox Academy had become a sea of flowers. For the first time, the 100 Flowers Lane lived up to its name. Even more joyous were the hawkers selling flowers in the lane and the 4 great markets in the pergolas. No matter how the odds changed, no matter how the contents of the bets were adjusted, as long as people paid more and more attention, the merchants would always be able to obtain the greatest profit. People were discussing how long Tang 36's winning streak could last. At the same time, they confirmed that the young master of the family of Wen Shui, who had been known as a genius since he was a child, was just like what Elder Tianji said when the proclamation of Azure Cloud changed last year. As long as one cultivated diligently, one's strength could easily increase by leaps and bounds. Some people were already wondering how far the 17-year-old Tang 36 would go if the proclamation of golden distinction changed this year. Just like a few days ago, Tang 36 stood in the sea of flower petals. His expression was calm, as if he wasn't moved by the beautiful scene and the shouts of the girls on the street. However, he was thinking about something else. The weather was a bit hot recently. The flowers that the flower vendors brought from Green Hill County were too luxuriant. Standing in the sea of flowers, He felt like he was standing in a pile of fat and tender pork belly. "You really are amazing." A cold voice suddenly came from the crowd. "I'm very curious, if the proclamation of golden distinction changed now, where would you rank?" With this voice, a man dressed in black, his entire body suffused with a cold aura, slowly walked to the gate of the Orthodox Academy. This was a question that many people in the capital were curious about, but no one was more suitable and more powerful than this man. Because this man in black was one of the experts on the proclamation of golden distinction. He was ranked 27th and was at the initial level of star condensation. His surname was Mu and his name was Boss, so he was called Mu Laoban. In reality, he really was a boss in the business of selling tombs. Mu Laoban grew up in the southern Yuling Mountains. The method he cultivated leaned towards the sinister fire of the earth. His fighting methods were strange and unpredictable. Even experts of the same level would find it hard to defeat him in a one-on-one battle. He was a guest of the family of Tian Hai. Just like Zhou Ziheng, he was also a teacher of the temple seminary. Therefore, he had the right to challenge the Tradition Academy. With Mu Laoban's appearance, the temperature in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate instantly dropped, a chill appearing in the midsummer sky. The crowd subconsciously moved out of the way, and the shouts of the young girls turned into worried whispers. The people who came to challenge the Tradition Academy today all handed in their letters of challenge last night. Tang 36 was not surprised by the appearance of these people, and he had already made ample preparations. He knew he was not Mu. He wasn't Mu Laoban's opponent. So he was. Laoban Ensik. He didn't want to fight. So he Hai said. He was. The Tianhai clan will give you 3,000 taels of silver and a bag of crystal every year. Right now I don't have any extra crystal on hand, only 30,000 taels of silver note. Tang Aaa of 6 of Tang of Tian, the Wang Mu Tang 6 Wang A Chen Long Wang the Wang Lu Chen Lu Zhou is Mu Yang is. He really is. He really is a greedy man. Tang 36 smiled at the struggling expression on Mu Laoban's face. Then, he remembered how he had used a roast chicken to deal with Zhixio in the grand examination. He felt that he really was a genius in business. Seeing this, the people of the capital were dumbfounded. How could it be like this? What Tang 36 regretted, but what made the people of the capital happy, was that Mu Laoban was able to resist the temptation of money. I really do like money, but there are many things in this world that are more important than money. Mu Laoban regretfully said to Tang 36, "You understand." Tang 36 understood. To Mu Laoban, a vile person, things more important than money were not things like justice or promises. It could only be that the family of Tian Hai had something on him, or even more money. Mu Laoban took a short black spear from his disciple and walked to the edge of the Sea of Flowers. This spear was probably forged from refined iron, but for some reason it was especially short. Presumably, the spear technique used in battle was extremely treacherous, but the most treacherous part was the terrifying poison on the tip of the spear. "Is this also okay?" Tang 36 called out to the tea house across the street. The priests of the Li Palace were responsible for the safety of the Orthodox Academy, but the person truly qualified to confirm the fairness of the all-school martial exhibition was in that tea house. Only an extremely small number of people in the capital knew that in the past few days, Archbishop Mao Chiyu of the Hall of Illustrious Persons and First Hall Master Daoist Siyuan of the Hall of Subjugation would sometimes sit in that tea house and drink tea. There was no sound from the tea house, which meant that Daoist Siyuan and Mao Chiyu did not believe that the spear soaked in poison was against the rules. Mu Laoban looked at Tang 36 and smiled. Between his scarlet lips, his dense white teeth seemed like the bones of an animal in the depths of ice and snow. His voice was similarly cold and threatening. "Please. Please my ass," Tang 36 said. Mu Laoban's expression subtly changed, the sinister chill in his eyes growing even stronger. Could it be the Orthodox Academy wants to concede? Idiot, I'm not the only one in the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 sheathed his sword without hesitation, turned around and walked towards the gate, yelling, "Hurry up and come out. Since this guy isn't willing to take the money, I can't do anything about it." The gate of the Orthodox Academy was pushed open and Chen Chongqing walked out. When he passed by Tang 36, he couldn't help but complain. "Back then, you said you could solve this problem, but this is how you solved it? What did I do wrong? Drown, soldiers come with arms, water comes with earth, drown. Even 30,000 taels of silver can't drown that greedy bastard, and I can't beat him, so of course you have to go." Chen Chongqing stopped and said somewhat helplessly, "Can I not?" Tang 36 shrugged nonchalantly and said, "Don't forget what we've discussed." Chen Chongqing nodded. In these past few days, it seemed like Tang 36 was fighting alone, but in reality, every night, they would gather in the library to discuss their opponents for the next day. Even the heavily injured Jishyo would occasionally give a few extremely incisive suggestions. Coupled with the constant stream of intelligence sent over by the Wenshui Tangs and the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, they were able to obtain 12 consecutive victories that shook the capital. But there would always be an opponent that he and Tang 36 couldn't defeat. What should they do then? They set a rule: no matter who won or lost, they could not receive any unrecoverable injuries, such as the Sea of Consciousness or the Ethereal Palace, or losing an arm. As for other situations, they didn't need to worry too much. The Li Palace had sent 2 cardinals who were highly skilled in the Holy Light technique to guard the Orthodox Academy, so it didn't matter how they got injured. Seeing Chen Chongqing appear on the stone steps, the crowd that had just quieted down for a moment suddenly burst into an even louder cheer than before. Tang 36, who was just about to enter the Orthodox Academy to rest, heard the cheers behind him and couldn't help but angrily grumble. The 12 consecutive victories of the Orthodox Academy had allowed Tang 36 to blossom with unprecedented brilliance, so much so that the people of the capital had somewhat forgotten Chen Chongqing's existence. Only now did they remember that he was the true principal of the Orthodox Academy, that he was the key figure, or perhaps the spiritual figure, in the revival of the Orthodox Academy. Moreover, everyone knew that he was the strongest expert of the Orthodox Academy, someone who had once surpassed cultivation levels to defeat the star condensation cultivator Zhou Ziheng. Mu Laoban's face turned even gloomier as he stared at Chen Chongqing on the stone step. "Should I feel honored, or should I feel sorry for Principal Chen?" Chen Chongqing did not answer him. Holding his sword horizontally in front of him, he said, "Please." Mu Laoban's expression turned solemn as he slowly raised the black spear in his hand, about 2 feet long. "I haven't been following many books in the past year. It's nothing more than romance of the Tang dynasty, vulgar people, back to cats, and Korean entertainment. These books are gradually ending. After Back to Cats, it's Xing Tang, and Yu Zue is even earlier. Fortunately, when old books come to an end, there will naturally be new ones. I will always continue to trust authors that I trust, such as Fu Tian." A few days ago, before the end of Grand Tang, Fu Tian had already begun to write a new book. Without the slightest hesitation, he published both. This makes me feel inconceivable. Just how did this girl cultivate such a valiant execution ability? How did she maintain her love for writing after all these years? Yes, you should be able to see, but you really are mistaken. This is not an advertisement, but a very serious sharing. Fu Tian's new book is called A Handbook for Making a Living in the Ming Dynasty. It really is very good. If you don't believe me, you can go take a look. Chapter 464. Buzz. A gust of air suddenly appeared at the tip of the black spear. It was a distortion of the air caused by the spear tip's high-speed vibration. With a sharp sound, the sharp tip of the spear pierced through the air. With an unimaginable speed and power, it pierced towards Chen Chongqing, who was on the stone step. Worthy of his reputation for being sinister and fierce, Mu Laoban's spear had come without warning, extremely bizarre. Just because it was strange didn't mean it lacked power. Countless flower petals rose from the ground and followed the iron spear up the stone steps. There were pink and white flower petals everywhere in front of the Tradition Academy, blocking Chen Chongqing's vision and also the vision of many people. They only knew that the short spear was behind the sea of flowers. The dancing petals were rapidly turning black, a sign that the spear tip had been infected by the poison. In an instant, this so-called martial arts challenge became extremely dangerous, and everyone's hearts were in their throats. The rain of flowers filled the sky as the iron spear pierced through the air. It looked like a mottled snake that had emerged from the sea of flowers. However, no matter how strange the trajectory of this short spear was, it couldn't break through Chen Chongqing's sword. Because this was the stupid sword that not even Su Li had been able to master. It was the #1 defensive sword technique in the world that could only be practiced by those who were not good with the sword. Dang. In reality, the sharp tip of the spear, which was soaked in terrifying poison, had already clashed with Chen Chongqing's sword countless times. Back in Xuanyang City, not even painted armor Xiao Zhang's spear had been able to surpass this sword, much less this spear. But the tip of this broken spear was contaminated with a terrifying poison. Would this poison be transmitted to Chen Chongqing's body through the sword? This was what Mu Laoban thought. Over the years, the reason he had been able to defeat many opponents who were not weaker than him was precisely because as the battle went on, the cold poison in his spear would rise with the wind. It would move as it pleased, noiselessly destroying his opponent's weapon. Then, through the weapon or even through the air, it would invade their lungs and meridians, ultimately rendering them powerless to continue fighting. None of this would happen today. Chen Chongqing's seemingly ordinary but somewhat bright sword contained an unimaginable amount of dragon's might and energy. How could it be damaged by a mortal's poison? There was naturally a reason why the sword was named stainless. If there was no problem with the sword, then there would be no problem with the person, because the person was pure as well. Chen Chongqing was good at medicine. After receiving the information from the education board yesterday, he made the necessary preparations. Even if he hadn't taken the medicine in advance, the cold poison on the spear wouldn't have been able to harm him in the slightest. This was because the soul of a black frost dragon had once resided in his body, and he had once bathed in the true blood of that black frost dragon. The strength of his body far surpassed that of a perfect purification. From a certain perspective, rather than saying that his body was as powerful as a human's, it would be better to say that it was more like a true dragon's. Other than a poison on the level of Nank's peacock plume, how could this so-called poison from the southern mountains do anything to him? As the petal rain fell, the spear and sword separated, revealing Mu Laoban's shocked and bewildered eyes. Chen Chongqing used his discerning steps, transforming into a blur and arriving before him. Mu Laoban roared and retreated. At the same time, his black spear crushed apart countless petals, creating a barrier of pink, white, and black. This was his star domain. After his battle with Zhou Ziheng, the entire continent knew that Chen Chongqing had the ability to surpass cultivation levels and challenge star condensation cultivators. Mu Laoban did not dare to be careless, and it was clear that he had learned the lesson from Zhou Ziheng's battle. His retreat was firm and decisive. More importantly, he had used his star domain extremely early and extremely quickly. Before Chen Chongqing had even attacked, it had already enveloped his entire body. He was the same as many people, still firmly believing that the iron law of the cultivation world was an iron law. On that day, Chen Chongqing had been able to destroy Zhou Ziheng's star domain with a single strike because Zhou Ziheng's mind was in chaos, or because Chen Chongqing's sword was too sharp, or because his luck was too good. He believed that his star domain was stronger and more solid than Zhou Ziheng's. Most importantly, he believed that in a situation where he was prepared, his mind would definitely not be in chaos. As a result, he did not believe that Chen Chongqing would be able to so easily destroy his star domain today. However, how could he and those people who clung to the so-called Iron Law and were unwilling to let go understand the profound thoughts that a genius like Su Li could not comprehend? How could they know just what the so-called intellectual sword was? The intellectual sword was truly not a sword style, but a method of battle. When the petals on the ground in front of the Orthodox Academy poured into the sky like a waterfall, when that metal spear treacherously pierced through the rain of petals, when Chen Chongqing held his sword horizontally in front of him, he had already used his intellectual sword. This sword had originated from last night's calculations, and now it fell amidst the rain of petals. A ray of light appeared in front of the Orthodox Academy, like a bolt of lightning. The stainless sword seemed to pierce into the sky above the rain of petals, but in the end it only pierced through a soft petal. But behind that soft petal, about the size of a fingernail, was Mu Laoban's eyes. Just like this, Chen Chongqing had easily found a hole in his star domain. Chen Chongqing had used the most ordinary true sword of the orthodoxy, but at this moment it was the most suitable method. The dagger pierced through the petals, piercing towards Mu Laoban's eyes. His eyes revealed an expression of shock, but he did not notice that there seemed to be some other emotion in the deepest depths of his eyes. He fiercely howled. With a squelch, the dragon-cry's sword stabbed into his chest. But unlike when he had battled Zhou Ziheng, the peerlessly sharp dragon-cry's sword had actually failed to pierce through his body. Instead, it had been blocked by something. Sensing the strangeness from the tip of the sword, Chen Chongqing's pupils constricted. Mu Laoban's clothes concealed a flexible armor. The problem was, what flexible armor in the world could block his sword? He was still too inexperienced. If it were Tang 36, he would have already guessed that the flexible armor hidden in Mu Laoban's clothes was one of the treasures that guarded the Tianhai clan, the Six Protections Divine Armor. The Six Protections Divine Armor was a divine artifact ranked 79th on the tier of legendary weapons. It was said that it had once belonged to the Tianliang Wang clan, and was later conscripted into the palace by Emperor Taizu. Later on, Emperor Xian was worried that the Tianhai Empress would be ambushed by an enemy in the 100 Herb Garden, so he gave it to her to protect herself. When the Empress reached the Saint Realm, she no longer needed any defense, so she gave it to her father, who had yet to return to the Sea of Stars. From then on, the Six Protections Divine Armor had always been stored in the Tianhai Prefecture. It was probably currently being worn by Mu Laoban. It had to be said that the Tianhai clan had truly invested a great deal this time. It was no wonder that even when Tang 36 had taken out such a thick stack of silver notes, it had still not moved the greedy Mu Laoban. It truly deserved to be called a divine artifact on the tier of legendary weapons. The Dragoncry sword was actually unable to pierce through it in one blow, and Chen Chongqing's sword technique was forced to stop midway. The fear in Mu Laoban's eyes instantly transformed into a berserk, killing intent. With a howl, his short spear fiercely pierced towards Chen Chongqing's throat. Even more frightening was that his spear energy continued to explode, reconstructing the star domain in an extremely short amount of time, trapping Chen Chongqing within. Logically speaking, the most important method of a star condensation expert was their star domain. They would never allow their opponent to enter their star domain, but the current situation was very special. Yes, he had to admit that the iron laws of the cultivation world had already lost their effectiveness before Chen Chongqing's sword. Then he might as well use his star domain to trap Chen Chongqing and then face him head-on. The people that had come to challenge the Orthodox Academy in the past few days had all studied Chen Chongqing very deeply, especially his first battle with Zhou Ziheng. Everyone could see that the sword intent he had inherited from Su Li was incomparably exquisite, and his sword style was as vast and complex as the sea. Although his Yesher step was incomplete, It was enough to help him move as fast as lightning. However, Chen Chongqing had a great weakness. He had not yet reached 16, was still a youth. He had determined his fated star, and it had only been a year since he had begun cultivating. Even if he was the reincarnation of Zhou Dufu, the amount of true essence in his body could not compare to those experts that had cultivated for decades or even centuries. And this was when people did not know that his meridians also had problems, that the efficiency of his true essence output was abysmal. In short, Chen Chongqing's greatest weakness was the amount of true essence he had. However, Mu Laoban did not know one thing, and at the same time, he did not remember a few things. In Xuanyang City, Liang Wangsun had once used a similar method to deal with Chen Chongqing. If Chen Chongqing's true essence really was so weak, how could he have withstood Go Hanqi's storm-like attacks in the Grand Examination, and how could he have broken through Liang Wangsuan's broken star domain in Xuanyang City? If not even Liang Wangsuan's star domain could hold him down, who under star condensation could? Under the awning, many people believed that Chen Chongqing might lose this battle, and began to stand up in shock. But the people in the tea house and in the quiet carriages at the end of the street did not think this way. They knew, and would never forget, what Chen Chongqing had done in Xuanyang City. They were keenly aware that Chen Chongqing had the ability to escape, and this battle was still far from over. Victory and defeat had still not been decided. Yet what happened next was something that not even they could have imagined. Chen Chongqing did not choose to use the intellectual sword again and break through Mu Laoban's star domain. He first retreated and then made plans. His stainless sword continued to stab into Mu Laoban's chest, and then he continued forward. It was like he had never even thought about escaping, not caring that Mu Laoban was wearing the 6 protections divine armor of the tier of legendary weapons. He only thought about victory. A clear yell, a blazing chi suddenly appeared in front of the Orthodox Academy. The cold and sinister chi that Mu Laoban brought with him was like ice and snow encountering the blazing sun, instantly vanishing without a trace. The petals that filled the sky actually began to burn, transforming into a dazzling expanse of light. Mu Laoban's face paled in the light. As he was in the middle of the field, he could feel it the clearest, that fierce and blazing chi. Chen Chongqing's true essence had become incomparably majestic. His true essence was lacking, so it was all a facade. His expression suddenly changed, and he was truly terrified. With a roar, he no longer cared about his spear and desperately retreated. But how could Chen Chongqing give him this chance? The stainless sword in his hand stabbed straight into Mu Laoban's chest. Pierced through, the fierce sword intent directly destroyed all of Mu Laoban's will to fight. The terrifying strength sent him flying from the sharp dagger. A thunderous boom resounded in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate. Mu Laoban transformed into a black shadow and flew back several dozen zhang. In front of the awning on the street was an array that acted as a barrier. He heavily collided against it, then slumped to the ground, no longer able to get up. A faint blue glow appeared in the air in front of the awning, and one could faintly hear an extremely low tearing sound. Dust rustled down from the beams of the awning, sprinkling the heads and faces of many people within. Mu Laoban sat paralyzed on the ground, constantly vomiting blood, his eyes filled with extreme shock and fear. Just what was going on here? How could Chen Chongqing's true essence become so berserk and powerful in such a short amount of time? The people under the awning were similarly shocked to the extreme. They couldn't even care about the dust that had fallen on their bodies, staring at Chen Chongqing in shock. This strike of his had actually almost destroyed the barrier array on the street. Today, only one chapter. Chapter 465. This battle had lasted for a very short time, even shorter than the battle between Chen Chongqing and Zhou Ziheng on the first day. Everything had happened too quickly, and the common people simply could not see it clearly. Chen Chongqing's sword had stopped in front of Mu Laoban's chest for an extremely brief moment, and they had no way of knowing that under Mu Laoban's clothes was the legendary divine armor of the tier of legendary weapons. They only saw Chen Chongqing draw his sword, pierce through his opponent's chest, and send him flying out onto the street. As a result, they couldn't help but look down on Mu Laoban, thinking to themselves, even if your strength is inferior to Little Principal Chen's, you know how Little Principal Chen defeated Zhou Ziheng. Could it be that you haven't made any preparations? If you had made preparations and still lost in the same manner, then that would be even worse. Of course, many people had noticed the strange phenomenon of Chen Chongqing's sword. That sword was like a blazing sun, erupting with boundless light and heat, transforming the sea of flowers into a sea of fire. Just what sort of sword was this? Mu Laoban was in great pain, very weak, very perplexed. He was also thinking about this question. Chen Chongqing was clearly only at the upper level of ethereal opening, so how could he have more true essence than many star condensation cultivators? And how could it pierce through the 6 protections divine armor? Just what sort of ghost sword was this? The stewards and lords under the awning were also very shocked, thinking, just what is going on here? A sigh rose up in the tea-house, and then everything returned to normal. In that black carriage at the end of the street, a brush was steadily and smoothly walking across a piece of paper, leaving behind words. Chen Chongqing has finally used the 3rd sword. This sort of violent sword technique clearly consumes a lot of true essence, but it's different from the battle in Xuanyang City recorded. Chen Chongqing can already use it more than once. It seems that after returning to the capital, he has clearly improved. Mu Sen was wearing the 6 protections divine armor, but he was still unable to block that sword. Besides Chen Chongqing's explosive increase in true essence, it should also have something to do with that dagger called the stainless sword. The 2 officials of the Department for Purging Officials faithfully recorded everything they had seen today. Only then did they put down their brushes and rub their somewhat sore wrists. They silently looked at each other, both seeing the shock and confusion in each other's eyes. Even if the sword style that Su Li had taught Chen Chongqing could use a secret technique to ignite true essence and explode with energy countless times greater than normal for a short period of time, that was, the 6 protections divine armor. How could it be broken so easily? I hear that the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets has already sent someone to the capital to take a look at the stainless sword. Is the tier of legendary weapons really going to change this year? Last time, it was said that when the stainless sword appears, the tier of legendary weapons will inevitably be updated. But after today's battle, I'm afraid that this sword will be ranked a little higher. The 6 protections divine armor had always been a divine weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. For the stainless sword to be able to so easily pierce through it meant that it was naturally ranked far above it. The carriage was very quiet. An official suddenly thought of something, picked up the brush again and wrote on the paper, Chen Chongqing still didn't kill anyone. Yes, Mu Laoban was not dead. The stainless sword pierced through his chest. Just like last time, it passed right through his heart. Chen Chongqing's sword was so sharp that it made one's hair stand on end, and so accurate that it made one's hair stand on end. Then how stable was his hand holding the sword? Time passed extremely slowly. Finally, it was the middle of summer. In these 10 days, the Tradition Academy had welcomed dozens of challenges. Until now, they had not lost a single one, shocking the entire capital. Challengers below star condensation could not defeat Tang 36, even though he had won a few matches by the skin of his teeth, and one time he had even suffered rather heavy injuries. Challengers at the initial level of star condensation had all been defeated by Chen Chongqing. At this time, everyone had already confirmed that although Chen Chongqing had not yet succeeded in star condensation, he already had the level of an initial level star condensation expert. There were even people who had begun to imagine, if he were to fight with Qiu Shanjun, who had just succeeded in the beginning of the year, just who would win and who would lose. Up until now, no expert at the initial level of star condensation or above had challenged the Tradition Academy. This was because many experts at that level had become powerful figures of their own regions and were very difficult for the Tianhai clan to command. Even if there were, it was the relatively more important status of guest official. Since they were experts, they had to pay attention to their bearing. If they lowered their status to challenge Chen Chongqing, even if they won, it would still be an extremely shameful matter. Crucially, no one knew if the matter reached this step. The Pope, who had always maintained his silence, would unleash a thunderous rage. Of course, even if an expert at the middle level of star condensation really did appear, Tang 36 had already made ample preparations. As the manager of the Tradition Academy's external affairs, he had long awaited the arrival of that day. These days, the true surprise was Xian Yuanpo. Zhexiu was still resting in the library, recovering from his injuries, while Xian Yuanpo's right arm had finally completely recovered. Under Chen Chongqing's guidance, he had begun to cultivate Heavenly Thunderbringer. A violent true essence had begun to freely and joyfully circulate through his meridians, which were as thick as official roads. His innate divine strength could finally be perfectly controlled, thus displaying a destructive power that caused people's hearts to palpitate and the trees of the Tradition Academy to lament. Under a situation where he was certain of victory, Chen Chongqing had Xian Yuanpo represent the Tradition Academy in 4 matches. According to the standards of human cultivators, Xian Yuanpo, who wasn't even at the ethereal opening realm, actually didn't lose a single match. In the last match, he encountered an expert at the upper stage of ethereal opening, and he actually won. Of course, at the last moment, he was forced to transform. He uprooted a willow tree in front of the Tradition Academy's entrance and violently smashed through half of the Academy's wall in the 100 Blossom Lane, knocking out that swordsman at the upper stage of ethereal opening. Such violent strength, such violent tactic. As for the lightning shards that were hidden within the leaves of the willow tree, aside from Chen Chongqing, not many people noticed them. Initially, the elder of Tianji had placed Xian Yuanpo at the end of the proclamation of azure clouds, causing a lot of people to feel baffled. Now, no one thought that way anymore. Looking at the tree hole in front of the Tradition Academy's entrance and the obviously newly built Academy wall, people could only think, if the proclamation of azure clouds were to be updated, this Bear tribe youth who often held a bowl of rice and giggled foolishly on the Academy's stone steps, how high would he be placed? Summer was the hottest time in the capital, and also the most lively time. This year's summer in the capital was a bit hotter than previous years, and also a bit more lively. This was because the entrance of the Tradition Academy was bustling with activity every day. Famous people that were usually hard to see would appear one after another, and even fight for you. Not only that, they didn't need money or tickets. How could the citizens of the capital, who loved to watch the fun, miss out on this kind of event? After the weather became hotter, Tang 36 set the time for the duels to be in the morning. Therefore, every morning when the sky was just beginning to brighten, many citizens of the capital would rush over with flour rolls, buns and steamed buns. Many people even brought along their families, as if they were going for a walk. What was even more ridiculous was that when relatives and friends from other places came over, the citizens of the capital would specially bring them to the 100 Blossom Lane to watch the fun. The Tradition Academy was about to become the new 6 sights of the capital. The Tradition Academy's undefeated streak of over 10 matches obviously had more influence on the capital. For example, regarding the bet on the all-school martial exhibition, the 4 major markets no longer opened bets on the winners and losers. Instead, they began to make money in other areas. Every day, the bets opened were mostly about who would fight for the Tradition Academy. What sword style would they use? When would Xian Yuanpo pull down a tree? How many love letters would Tang 36 receive after winning today? And when would Chen Chongqing display that violent sword strike again? One evening, it was extremely hot. Chun Chong Sheng and the other two swam a few times in the lake and then sat on the big banyan tree in a daze. I haven't seen Princess Luo Luo for a long time. Tang 36 looked at the faraway setting sun and suddenly said. Chun Chong Sheng also looked at the setting sun. It was as if he could see the corridors of the Hall of Pure Virtue in Li Palace. Hearing Tang 36's words, he was silent for a long time and then gave a sound of agreement. Tang 36 turned his head and looked at him. Go find her tomorrow. Chun Chong Sheng took back his gaze from afar and looked down at the last few rays of golden light on the surface of the lake. After a moment of silence, he said, It might not be convenient for her. Luo Luo was in Li Palace, in the Pope's green leaf world. It was not convenient for her to come out. But in reality, he heard that she had appeared at the recent banquets in the royal palace. Most importantly, he heard that starting last month, Luo Luo would alternately live in Li Palace and the royal palace. Inconvenience was obviously due to other reasons. Chun Chong Sheng understood, so he maintained his silence. In fact, this had been his request for her in the first place. Last year, the Orthodox Academy had just become a new student. In the eyes of those important figures, Luo Luo entering the Orthodox Academy was just a child's play. Even the grand examination was like this, a small matter. But now it was different. The Pope and the Tianhai Divine Empress were gradually drifting apart. Luo Luo's identity was sensitive. If she still stayed in the Orthodox Academy or often returned to the Orthodox Academy, a small matter would become a big matter. Luo Luo was in the capital of the Great Zhou. She didn't represent herself, but the 800 li of the Red River and the two saints behind her. I don't care. I miss her. Tang 36 stood up and supported himself on the thick trunk of the great banyan tree. He looked at the distant Li Palace under the setting sun and said loudly. Chun Chong Sheng glanced at him and was very grateful. His identity was also very sensitive. There were many things that were not convenient to say. Tang 36 said he missed Luo Luo because he knew that Chun Chong Sheng missed Luo Luo. Luo Luo also missed the great banyan tree. I also miss Princess Luo Luo. Xian Yuan Pa said from the side. He really missed her. It had nothing to do with Chun Chong Sheng. Tang 36 patted his shoulder and said, Then let's have dinner tomorrow. If it's convenient for her, let's take her back to the Orthodox Academy. Xian Yuan Pa sat on the tree branch, but he was almost at the same height as Tang 36. This scene seemed somewhat harmonious. Then the two matches tomorrow morning should be finished quickly. Xian Yuan, you don't have to fight. Tang Tang and I will fight. Chun Chong Sheng suddenly thought of a problem. Tang 36 also thought of a very important problem. He squatted down and looked into his eyes. I have something to tell you. Chun Chong Sheng saw his serious expression and asked uneasily, What is it? Tang 36 said, Tomorrow is an instructor from the Heavenly Way courtyard in the Jiangnan state. His realm and strength are definitely not as good as yours, but can you use a few more moves? Recently, I've been saving up manuscripts. I really am saving up manuscripts. Today I only updated one chapter. Right now I have 7,000 characters in stock. If it was before, I would have already published it all. But my goal is to save up to 30,000 characters. In the future, I can guarantee that I can keep updating, especially when I have to drive more than 2,000 kilometers at the end of the month. Of course, this is my dream situation. Please let me dream for a while.